Chapter 396. At this moment the magistrate was sitting in his sedan, analyzing the current situation. The suspect had been caught. The murderer was most likely young Master Hay, the last person who came into contact with the victim. As for how the second student died, he did not care at all. As long as the case was pinned on one person, the case could be closed. Young Master Hay's identity was a little tricky. However, there was no other way. He had been to the Green Dragon Lake. According to the prince, anyone who had been to the Green Dragon Lake had to be secretly executed. He was supported by the prince. Compared to the Hay family, he was more afraid of offending the prince. While the magistrate was thinking, the carriage suddenly stopped. "What's wrong?" the magistrate shouted impatiently. The manservant respectfully handed over a token. The token was not big and it was just enough to be held in one hand. On the surface there was nothing special about it. However, the words written on it made the magistrate lose his footing and almost collapse in the carriage. His Majesty has arrived in person. The magistrate's first reaction was to wonder if the retired emperor had found out that he had cooperated with the prince and had come to punish him personally. The servant had never seen his master so nervous before. His face had turned deathly pale and he no longer had his usual domineering attitude. The magistrate opened the letter with trembling fingers. His face was completely pale. It was the royal family. After reading the letter, the magistrate froze. He could not stop the chill in his heart and he almost fell to the ground. He did not want to go any further. The prince. Only the prince could save him now. The magistrate pulled the curtain open and shouted anxiously, turn around, turn around. Don't go to the academy. Tell them to release young Master Hay immediately." "Don't go to the academy? But we finally have a clue for this case." The coroner sitting next to him did not know what was going on. The magistrate gnashed his teeth. "Why bother with the case now? I'm afraid I can't even keep my life. Turn around quickly and go to the Murong mansion." Drip, drip, drip. The rain fell on the banana leaves. Apart from Murong Wang, there was also a handsome man in white sitting in the Murong palace. The prefectural magistrate was drenched from head to toe. When he saw the man, he was shocked at first. Then he handed over the token in his hand. "Young master, do you recognize this?" The man looked at the token and didn't say anything. He just narrowed his eyes slightly and a deep look flashed across his eyes. King Murong could not stand still. There was fear on his face, but there was also a viciousness that could not be concealed. "This is the third prince's token." Yes, this lowly official entered the White Academy to handle a case this time. "It seems that I have offended him and caught someone who shouldn't be caught. With the means of the royal family, they will definitely know that I didn't have the emperor's permission and cooperated with the prince to privately transfer the officers and soldiers of the Ministry of Appointments. Your Highness, you must save me, Your Highness." After confirming that it was a member of the royal family, the magistrate panicked even more. "Don't worry, I will protect you." Emperor Murong patted the magistrate's shoulder. "The fifth prince will remember your kindness." The magistrate wiped the sweat on his forehead and smiled in relief. He knew that all these years of offerings would not be in vain. The fifth prince was different from the third prince. Although he was young, he always knew how to be an official and to be in a position of power. If everyone was as conceited as the third prince, how could this network of connections be opened? That was why when King Murong intentionally or unintentionally hinted at him, he chose to stand on the fifth prince's side. "Then this lowly official will thank your highness first." The magistrate kowtowed. King Murong helped him up and said, "Go back first and wait for my order. Don't be too anxious." "Yes." The magistrate retreated respectfully. King Murong narrowed his eyes and looked at the magistrate's back. The corner of his mouth lifted in satisfaction. So what if the third prince's talent is extraordinary? Without the support of his relatives, no matter how amazing his martial chi and talent are, he will not be able to break the situation of officials protecting each other. The rules passed down by the ancestors were to be obeyed. The third prince's faction was just wishful thinking. It was like hitting a rock with an egg. However, at this moment the other side was in full swing. He still needed his master to make a decision for him. Because as the magistrate had said, if someone found out that he was trying to mobilize the capital's imperial guards, he would face the great crime of being beheaded. "Master, what do you think I should do now?" The man gently turned the cup in his palm and took a sip. He said casually, Since your highness is ready to do it, why don't you take advantage of this opportunity to finish it? King Murong paused. He looked at the man in disbelief. Master, you mean, what I mean is not important. The key is what your highness thinks. The man lowered his voice. The eerie wind blew into Quan Jingji's ears. If the third prince is no longer around, your highness and the crown prince will be safe and sound. What do you think, your highness? Hearing this, King Murong understood. His master was asking him to take advantage of this opportunity to get rid of the third prince. King Murong shuddered and almost spilled the tea in his hand. The man held his hand at the right time and smiled. Your highness, why are you panicking? How many people know about what happened to the third prince in the academy? No one knows that you're going to send troops. Even if they know, they're only going to solve a case. As long as it's done cleanly, not only will the empress be released from the cold palace, even the fifth prince will inherit the throne in the future. You're right, master. King Murong did not wait for the man to finish. He said in a sinister voice, a great man must be ruthless. If it wasn't for the third prince, his younger brother would not have been caught and his younger sister would not have been banished to the cold palace. As long as the third prince was alive, his nephew would not be able to ascend the throne. Why don't I just kill him? As long as he did it cleanly, no one would know. However, the third prince's martial chi was invincible. He had no idea how to take down such a master. The man took a sip of tea and decided to help him to the end. Every year, the military department will have a military exercise. It's normal to exercise at the foot of the mountain. No one will suspect why your highness chose to exercise at Green Dragon Mountain. When the time comes, your highness just needs to cut off the connection between the White Academy and the outside world. With the help of the magistrate, you can directly encircle and annihilate the White Academy. Isn't it easy to kill the third prince? That's right. No matter how powerful the third prince was, how could he fight against thousands of armored soldiers? In addition, he could ask the magistrate to poison the water in the well. When the time comes, wouldn't it be easy to kill him? King Murong finally made up his mind. Since he was going to do it, he must make it so that the third prince could not escape. Chapter 397. Rumble. Thunder rumbled. It was only noon, but the sky outside was gray and gloomy. Hellion Vivian did not stay at Beligaju's for long, because she still had things to do. According to Yuan Ming, the Dead Man Mound was an evil formation built by piling up corpses. Since it needed corpses, there would definitely be people who would continue to die. What she needed to do now was to gather everyone together and not let them be alone. Because once they were alone, it would give the murderer a chance to attack. Therefore, as soon as Wei Wei left the inferior compound, the first thing she had to do was to let Tu Sufeng give the order to have all the students gather together. Those ladies from the superior compound were the hardest to please. They could not stand the rainy weather and had to stay in the stuffy tea house lobby with everyone else. What's wrong with the dean? Why did he listen to that ugly woman? Who knows, Sister Yun? Do you think it's meaningful for her to let us gather like this? Yun Biluo shook her head and coughed twice, looking like she was suffocated. This made the dissatisfied voices around them even louder. Wei Wei swept a glance at those few people who were full of complaints and suddenly smiled devilishly. Previously, teacher also said that the murderer is inside White Academy. Based on the current situation, whoever is alone, it will attack that person. Now the reason for gathering everyone here is very simple. It is to prevent the murderer from continuing his attack. If any of you are not afraid of death, you can leave. Just this one sentence made those young ladies shut their mouths completely. They looked at each other and coughed softly. They no longer said anything about leaving. Oh, humans are really afraid of death. Yuan Ming looked at the lobby and sneered sarcastically. Hellion Vivian tapped her leg with her fingers. This was a common action when she was thinking. As long as the effect is achieved, the range is smaller. That person should be in the middle of them. That was right. This was Hellion Vivian's real purpose. In order not to alert the enemy, Hellion Vivian deliberately said that to prevent the murderer from attacking. In fact, that was only a very small part of it. More importantly, they couldn't always wait until the murderer came to them before they realized it. They had to fight back and hunt. I've seen the corpses, Hellion Vivian said as she walked towards the group of students. Both of them have black spots on their bodies. I keep feeling that something is wrong. Yuan Ming frowned. What do you mean? Just as Hellion Vivian was about to speak, Heizei was brought back, followed by 2 Yamen runners. He looked calm and stood in the hall with an outstanding temperament. He did not look like a prisoner who had been taken away, but more like someone who had just gone out for a walk. Hellion Vivian looked at him from left to right. After confirming that he was not injured, she said, "I have something to ask you." Hei's raised his good-looking eyebrows and glanced at the Yamen runner who left. He lowered his voice and asked, "Is it related to this case?" Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. "How do you know?" "Because I did see something that day." Hei's narrowed his eyes. "The reason why the magistrate wanted to take me away is probably because of this. Let's sit down and talk?" "Okay." Hellion Wei nodded, but when she raised her eyes she saw a silhouette standing outside the door. Wearing pure white clothes, he exuded an ascetic demonic charm, not a trace of emotion leaked out. He only looked at her indifferently, the light in his eyes was as cold as ice. Little Seven was also there, but he was sitting in the tea house, stupidly eating the meat bun in his hand. He felt that there was nothing more delightful than having food, so he didn't notice the strange atmosphere between his third brother and third sister-in-law. Beligaju only glanced at Hellion Vivian, then walked past the tea house and back to the inferior compound. Hellion Wei was somewhat dazed by his gaze. However, she remembered that Heizei might have important clues, so she didn't worry too much. Once she sat down, she lowered her voice and asked, "What did you actually see that day?" "Someone in the White Academy was in contact with evil beasts." Hei's glanced at the students on the first floor. "Although it was far away and I couldn't see it clearly, there was definitely the aura of a demon beast beside the Green Dragon Lake that day." "That's not what I want to say. What I want to say is that the young lady of the Bai family who died was very strange." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "How strange?" "That night she didn't notice me, but I saw her." Hei's frowned and tried hard to recall. "She walked back and forth by the Green Dragon Lake. She seemed to be talking to herself, but at the same time she seemed to be talking to something. But that day there was no one else beside the Green Dragon Lake except her." Hearing this, Hellion Vivian's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Hei's and her eyes darkened. "I know what happened." "What happened?" Hei still did not understand. Hellion Vivian went downstairs and said, "The murderer of these murders was not someone else, but the victims themselves. Because there was a dirty thing possessing their bodies, that's why there was a murder in a locked room. In fact, that thing would change its target and throw away their bodies after absorbing all their resentment. We must find that thing, or else it would be useless even if the people died and it didn't die." "That's easy for you to say." Hei's looked at the hundreds of people in front of him. "How do we find it? How do we know who has that thing?" Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and glanced around the floor. Suddenly she thought of something. "Look at the shadow. The possessed person will have one more shadow than the average person." Hei smiled playfully. How did his adopted sister develop such a brain? How could she be so smart? Hellion Vivian was right. Looking at the shadow was the fastest way to find the demon-transforming beast. Unfortunately, before they started to search, a teacher said. One of the students fainted because it was too hot here, so he went to the private room on the second floor to rest. Resting alone at this time? Hellion Vivian did not think that anyone would be so daring. She suddenly frowned and ran directly to the second floor. At this moment, a faint noise came from the depths of the corridor. Hellion Vivian's face froze and walked toward that direction. The sound seemed to be coming from the private room, accompanied by the sound of raindrops reverberating intermittently. Hellion Vivian leaned against the wooden door and turned around abruptly. Her phoenix-like eyes scanned every inch of the private room. No one. Hellion Vivian looked at the open window again. The window was facing the direction where Beligaju had just left. Chapter 398. There was a loud bang. The loud noise interrupted Ying's report. Beligaju, who was sitting on the wooden chair, glanced out of the window and ordered casually, "Continue." Ying lowered his eyes and said, "There is nothing else." The magistrate released them without any hesitation. Beligaju's face was expressionless as he listened to Ying's report. He paused and asked, "Where did the magistrate go after releasing them?" Ying did not expect his master to ask this question. He was stunned for a moment before he replied, "I think he went to Prince Murong's mansion." "Is Prince Murong also the one who led the guards to put on a show?" Baligaju stopped drinking tea. Aning answered, yes. Upon hearing this, Baligaju's eyes darkened. Aning could not guess what his master was thinking. He just continued to kneel and listen to his master's orders. After a while, Bailey Jiaju picked up his pen and wrote a letter. Even though it was a letter, it was only a few words. Send it to the military camp. The cold tone of the voice made Shadow realize that this letter was not an ordinary one. Sir. He replied solemnly. Then he jumped out of the wooden window. But he did not know that the person standing outside was the one who wanted to kill the third prince. Bang bang bang. The sound of knocking came from outside the door. Baligaju was the only one left in the room. He put down the book in his hand and walked over. His face was still cold without any warmth. The door was opened. There was a person he did not know standing outside. But judging by his clothes, he was indeed a student of the academy. The student laughed, but the curve of his mouth was a bit abnormal. Why are you still in the room? Someone died at the superior compound again. The dean told everyone to gather at the tea house. Hurry up and come with me. As the student spoke, he reached out to grab Bailey Jiaju. However, Bailey Jiaju evaded his hand without a trace. Obviously, he did not expect there to be such an uninteresting person. The student paused. Probably because all the students had gone to the tea house, the courtyard was eerily quiet. Only the heavy footsteps and rapid heartbeats could be heard. Occasionally there was the sound of the wind blowing. Both of them did not speak. Obviously, Bailey Jiaju had no intention of following the other party. Gradually the student lost his patience. He slowly raised his head and smiled strangely. You're so troublesome. Since you don't want to follow me, I can only solve it here. Solve what? Solve you? Baligaju looked at the rain outside. It was raining non-stop. Compared to the student in front of him, he cared more about whether he would be wet. Even though he was a demon, he was still frustrated by his attitude. The student tilted his head and took off the hat on his head, revealing a pale face. His black hair fluttered in the absence of wind, giving him a sinister look. It's been a long time since I've met such an insensible human. But it doesn't matter. Soon you'll taste the consequences of being insensible. Is that so? Baligaju's voice was very indifferent, with a special kind of absent-mindedness. It was as if he did not care about the student at all. The student maintained the sinister smile on his face, but he was a little surprised. This human seemed to be different from the one he had met before. When ordinary people saw him like this, they would kneel on the ground and beg him to spare their lives. Forget it, this stupid human must have not realized how terrifying he was. The student clenched his teeth and black smoke spread from his body to the surroundings. His face had no nose and no mouth, only an empty mouth. However, Bailey Jiaju only held his forehead and smiled, his eyes were ice cold. Before you eat people, have you ever thought that there's something called bait in this world? You dare to touch bait? Huh. The moment Baligaju looked up, the student took a big step back. He looked at the man in front of him in disbelief. Who are you? Impossible, he was definitely not that person. If he was that person, how could he not see through him? And this burial mound. He must have broken through it a long time ago. But why were his eyes? Baligaju did not speak. He looked down at the student from above. His white teeth were slightly exposed and he was as handsome as a god. He slowly walked towards the student. His white clothes wrapped around his slender figure, revealing a cold, murderous aura. When the student saw him, he wanted to run away immediately. However, the man pulled him out of his body with his bare hands. This time, the demon-transforming beast was completely flustered. It tried to find a way to get into the fog. At the very least, it had to tell its master that the man might be back. However, before it could even take a step forward, a blazing heat spread throughout its body. It was a pain that came from the depths of its blood, spreading to its entire body. When Hellion Vivian walked up, she saw such a scene. The man's hands were stained with blood. His black curly hair fluttered to his waist. He was like a god in the dark. He was so handsome that one could not take their eyes off him. There was a deep sense of mockery in his eyes. That wild aura and the seductive corners of his mouth made even the magical beasts hidden deep in the academy tremble and be captivated by him. Under the light, his face was almost perfect. It was naturally cold. However, Baligaju did not expect Hellion Vivian to walk up at this moment. He put his hands behind his back as if he was trying to hide something. Ah, how ridiculous. He who had always regarded the world as nothing, was actually concerned about how others looked at him. That was right. He did not want his prey to see his bloodthirsty look. Are you okay? A clear voice came into his ears. Because she was running too fast, she seemed to be worried. Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian. The hostility in his eyes faded away. He wondered how much she had seen just now. However, that person started to touch it. She touched it left and right. Then she raised her head. Her face was full of seriousness. Do you have time to learn from each other? To be honest, when she saw His Highness's posture just now, she really wanted to fight with him. He wanted to see where his limit was. How did he crush a magical beast with his bare hands? Bailey Jiaju smirked. Ordinary people would have thought of him as a monster if they saw his killing skills. She was the only one who wanted to fight with him from time to time. Sure. Beligaju's voice was calm. What do you want to bet? Hellion Vivian, anything. As long as His Highness was willing to fight with her. Beligaju looked at her. As if he thought of something, evil appeared in his eyes. Then the loser will warm the bed. Chapter 399. Warm the bed? Hellion Vivian instinctively felt that something was not right. After all, she had been tricked by someone's words. For example, the obligation of husband and wife. Come to think of it, the definition of warming the bed was, if she won he would warm the bed for her. If she lost she would warm the bed for him. Was there a difference between winning and losing? Hellion Vivian was speechless. Therefore, when His Highness agreed to fight with her, it was a trap for her to fall into. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows slightly. She crossed her arms and glanced at the man beside her. She saw that on that noble and flawless face, there was still a wicked and wanton arc. When the sun shone on it, it was like the shards of a diamond. Every part of it was just the right amount of handsomeness. When his thin lips pressed closer, he directly pressed them behind her ear. What? Are you going back on your words? Hellion Vivian trembled. She did not say anything. Yuan Ming's voice rang out. The formation has been broken. The person who set up the formation should still be at Green Dragon Lake. Don't flirt with your man for now. Hurry up and go to Green Dragon Lake to see who is controlling the formation. Hellion Vivian did not bother to correct Yuan Ming. She jumped out of the wooden window and flew toward Green Dragon Lake. Beligaju retracted his finger. His eyes fell on the evil beast on the ground. He stepped on it casually with his left foot. Puff. Beside Green Dragon Lake, the little one with the gourd on his back was in pain. Black blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Master, the demon-transforming beast seems to have been killed. That person's spiritual power was too strong. Before I could react, I know. The man reached out and patted the little one's head. There was a comforting warmth in his voice. The dead man burial ground is no more. There is still the slaughtering of the courtyard. Emperor Murong's army should be here soon. However, we can't stay here any longer. Let's go now. As he said that, the man opened the paper umbrella in his palm and walked into the thick mist. Hellion Vivian, who had rushed over, only had time to see a blurry figure. Without any hesitation, Hellion Vivian struck with her left hand. A swoosh was heard. Lu Guang's silver knife shot towards the man's back. Hellion Vivian clearly heard the sound of clothes being torn. Then it sounded like a child exclaiming, "Master." However, when she got there, other than the bloodstains on the ground, there was nothing else. He really escaped quickly. Moreover, this person was very smart. Originally, she had stabbed him because she wanted to use the bloodstains to determine his location. However, other than the first pool of blood, Hellion Vivian did not find a second pool of blood. It was obvious that the other party had thought of this and reacted accordingly at the first moment. Such a meticulous mind was truly difficult to deal with. With your current cultivation, you won't be able to deal with that person. Yuan Ming's figure floated up, his eyes looking at the gradually dissipating mist on the lake. His formation was just broken, his body is a bit weak. Under normal circumstances, if you were to fight face-to-face, woman, your chances of winning are very low. Hellion Vivian picked up the silver knife that had fallen on the ground and put it back behind her waist. Her movements were handsome. I really want to see what kind of person he is. You better not see him. Yuan Ming rubbed his aching temples and curved his thin lips. However, to be able to hurt such a person, woman, you're already very abnormal. I think he thought of dodging, but he didn't expect your knife to be so fast. Hellion Vivian smiled and did not continue speaking. At this moment, the sound of footsteps could be heard from outside. The sound was too loud, it was hard to ignore it. Hellion Vivian reached out and grabbed a classmate who ran out, asking in a low voice, "What's going on?" That student shook his head, looking confused. "It's the prefectural magistrate. The prefectural magistrate is here with his soldiers." Prefectural magistrate? Before Hellion Vivian could think about it, she saw the prefectural magistrate walking in with a group of soldiers behind him. There were too many soldiers in that group and they were guarding every exit of the academy. Hellion Vivian faintly felt that there was some kind of danger. In her previous life she dealt with such matters. Therefore she was very sensitive to the slightest sign of trouble. Hellion Wei Wei paused her steps and glanced at the outside of the courtyard. The bailiffs outside had been replaced by armored soldiers. If they were only here to investigate a murder case, it would not be so grand that even the soldiers from the army would be transferred here. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly thumped. Investigating a murder case didn't require such a large formation, but if they wanted to deal with a prince... Almost in the next second, Hellion Vivian turned around and returned to the inferior compound. Without a doubt, these people's target was Beligaju. At the same time, all the students were driven to the inferior compound, and the prefectural magistrate kept saying that it was for protection. However, the students were not stupid. They looked at each other and sensed that something was amiss. "Your Highness." The situation was urgent, so Aning didn't care about the people around him. He directly knelt in front of Beligaju and spoke faster than usual. "Prince Murong is not conducting a drill. He secretly mobilized the city guards and planned to cooperate with the prefectural magistrate to suppress the academy. I followed your Highness' order and went to the barracks nearest to the academy, but..." At this point Aning raised his eyes and looked at Beligaju, who was still calm and collected. He clenched his fingers and seemed to be angry. "They refused to send the soldiers." Hellion Wei Wei's figure paused. In her impression, the 18 Shadows had never been in such a sorry state before. Although he was wearing black clothes, it was obvious that he was injured. Moreover, it wasn't just in one place. Because of the blood sticking to his clothes, it had already formed a shadow. From the moment he entered, he had been clutching his abdomen. It seemed that he had a knife wound. The situation was not as simple as Aning reported. Not only did the barracks at the foot of the mountain not send the soldiers, they also wanted to take the opportunity to kill Aning. But in this world there was no one who didn't know. The 18 Shadows were almost the representative of the royal family in the current dynasty. They were not like the other attendants. In the Huang dynasty, only the most powerful martial arts master could command them. Even the current emperor, as long as he didn't practice to the most powerful level, could not make them willingly submit to him. But now someone dared to openly attack the 18 Shadows. Beligaju had his reasons for not interfering in the academy's case. The relationship was complicated, and one wrong move could lead to eternal damnation. If she had not asked him to help save Hei's, the current situation would not have happened. Hellion Vivian lowered her thin lips and slowly clenched her fingers. Yun Biluo glanced at her and her eyes gradually lit up. Chapter 400. She walked to a deserted corner. Yun Biluo blocked Hellion Vivian's way. Hellion Vivian was not in the mood to play along with her. She looked up with a cold gaze and uttered coldly, "Get lost." Yun Biluo took a deep breath and her expression changed. She said, "I don't care how you treat me, but I really didn't expect that you would let His Highness take the risk for young Master He." She paused. "You asked His Highness to intervene, right? Otherwise, young Master He wouldn't have been released so quickly." Wei Wei's back view paused, the hand hidden in her long sleeves tightened, but that pair of eyes carried a different kind of clarity and rationality. Yun Biluo's voice softened. "His Highness has told me about what happened between you and His Highness. Both of you have made an agreement. It's understandable that His Highness helped you, but don't you think you've gone too far this time? Are you done?" Hellion Vivian looked back and smiled bloodthirstily. "Get lost if you're done." Yun Biluo looked up with a sorrowful face. "You and I both know what Shadow's report means. Emperor Murong wants to kill His Highness and replace him. His Highness and I will be together soon. I don't want him to be in danger because of an agreement. Possible, I hope you can leave. Only when you're gone, His Highness will be relieved of the burden on his shoulders." After that she walked into the crowd, not caring about Hellion Vivian's reaction. Because she had guessed it. A person like Hellion Vivian would definitely not be able to withstand the pressure and would choose to leave. Bang. Another student who wanted to leave was invited back to the inferior compound by the soldiers. They did not understand what happened to their martial chi. It was not until they saw the prefectural magistrate coming back from the well that they realized that they had been poisoned with a certain amount of cultivation dissipation powder. The amount of cultivation dissipation powder was very small and was not fatal, but it reminded them not to use their martial arts. Outside the courtyard, the prefectural magistrate had already begun to deploy his troops. Even though he was sitting in his room, he could hear the sound of horses galloping at the foot of the mountain. It was obvious how fast they were approaching. Although the shadows were injured, they were all expressionless. They were spread out in every corner of the inn, using the vantage point to control the academy's every move. Even if they were injured now, if someone underestimated them, they would still lose more than they gained. This was the power of the 18 shadows. However, there was still no news from the barracks. The letters that were sent out seemed to be dead. They did have people in the capital, but they were quite a distance away. Even if they had already received the news, they would not be able to make it in time. The magistrate didn't make a move because he knew that anyone could leave except for the third prince. Even if he had the best martial chi, it was still the same. A prince who abandoned his subjects and fled in the face of war, how could he be the ruler of a country in the future? If he ran away, he would definitely be spat to death and his face would be tarnished. They had planned everything before besieging the mountain. Every move was to drive the third prince into a corner. Even if he didn't die, he would have nowhere to go in the future. Yunbiluo looked at all this and was so worried that she gripped the handkerchief in her hand tightly. The situation was more complicated than she thought. The army was pressing in and they couldn't get any reinforcements. There was only one end for them: death. She didn't expect that things would turn out like this just because she asked the young master to send someone to arrest Hiai's. No. She had to persuade His Highness to leave the hospital and leave the mountain. With the sound of running outside, every student looked at Baligaju like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. Although they all had martial chi, they had never been in a war before. Among them, there was no lack of ladies from noble families who usually lived a very good life. They usually needed someone to support them when they walked, so they had never been frightened like this. At this moment they were almost crying after a tiring day. "Your Highness, let's get out of here quickly. We can't go on like this. Once the gate is broken, it will be difficult to leave." "Yes, Your Highness, let's get out of here now." How daring can that magistrate be? Yunbiluo saw that everyone had spoken, so she also lowered her voice. "Your Highness, I know you're worried about those students who can't leave, but at this point we can only get out of here first. At most we'll compensate them later. You are the prince of the great Huang dynasty. If something were to happen to you, what would happen to those people who have helped you for so many years? How many spies have you planted for so many years? Aren't you waiting for the day you can sit on that throne? The future prosperity and decline of the War Dragon Empire will all depend on you. Are you willing to die in this Azure Dragon Mountain?" What Big Sister Yun said is correct. We only need to take the people from the superior compound and the fine compound away. The people from the remaining 2 compounds should have been willing to sacrifice their lives for His Highness. Among those people, most of them will also go into battle in the future. Now that His Highness has a use for them, what's wrong with them sacrificing a bit? The young ladies from the superior compound spoke these words confidently. Besides, they could definitely escape. Things were not as complicated as what Hellion Vivian thought. It was just an insignificant official who had an idea that he shouldn't have. There were many officials in the Green Dragon Mountain area. So what if the military camp didn't send troops? When they reached the capital, there would be someone to protect His Highness. No matter how bold they were, they wouldn't dare to hurt the third prince openly. It was undeniable that the ladies from the aristocratic families were so self-righteous. Even the military camp refused to send troops. How could they reach the capital safely? Facing this kind of stupid people, Bailey Jiaju curved his thin lips into a smile that wasn't a smile. "Shadow, since these people want to leave so badly, then send them all away." "Yes." Shadow lowered his eyes and looked at those overly pampered ladies from the aristocratic families. He couldn't help but shake his head in his heart. These people were hopeless. Didn't they know that during a siege battle, the first batch of people to escape would only die more miserably? His Highness's means were still so ruthless. "I'm not leaving." Yun Biluo raised her beautiful teary eyes and looked at Beligaju with a gentle face. No matter what happens this time, I'll stay by your highness's side and take care of your highness. Yun Biluo didn't continue because the look in Beligaju's eyes made her extremely uncomfortable. That kind of aloof indifference, even without any emotion, made people feel that there was a hint of mockery in it. At this moment, a shadow guard came in from outside and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, the Princess Consort seems to be missing." Chapter 401. The air in the courtyard was stagnant for a moment. Yun Biluo's drooping little face revealed an arc that no one noticed. Beligaju's voice was as cold as a thin layer of ice. "What do you mean Bite seems to have disappeared? I haven't seen the Princess Consort since just now." Speaking of this, the shadow guard paused and continued. "The second young master of the He family also disappeared with the Princess Consort." Beligaju listened and clenched his fingers one by one. His hands that were hidden under his sleeves became clearer and clearer. He clenched his fists so hard that his fingernails turned white. A burst of exclamation came from the crowd. "Even the second young master of the He family is not here? In my opinion, I'm afraid that the eldest daughter of the Hellion family was scared when she saw the scene outside. She didn't forget to bring along her old lover before she escaped." Yun Biluo listened to the surrounding conversations and subconsciously looked towards Beligaju's direction, as if she wanted to comfort him. She called out hesitantly, "Your Highness, it's understandable that Wei Wei did this. After all, anyone who saw such a scene would want to escape you." Yun Biluo raised her head. She thought she would see a furious face, but to her surprise, not only was there no emotion on Bailey Jiaju's face, he did not even lift his eyelids. All he did was play with the black jade ring on his finger. No one knew what he was thinking. Even Shadow couldn't understand his master's meaning. He always felt that Miss Yun was speaking for the Princess Consort at first glance. However, it was true that the Princess Consort had left, but the cause of this matter had not been investigated clearly. It was not good to jump to conclusions so early. However, why did the Princess Consort leave? After a long while, Bailey Jiaju finally opened his mouth, but the words he said had nothing to do with Hellion Wei Wei. His voice was indifferent, but that pair of long and narrow eyes overflowed with a murderous aura. "Send these people who want to leave out first. Also, who told you that she escaped?" Everyone froze. They didn't understand why his voice was so cold. They didn't understand why they could still feel the piercing coldness when they were about to be sent out. Shadow, who knew everything, lowered his head and replied with a yes. At the beginning, His Highness was probably just saying those words out of anger. But now His Highness was truly furious. Perhaps the reason for all this was because these people had just spoken ill of the Princess Consort. "Your Highness." Seeing that Beligaju did not listen to everyone's advice, Yun Biluo's eyes reddened. She quickly followed him into the room. "Miss Wei Wei's departure is hard for you, but this is the truth. Aning has just reported to me. When you were young, you also said that you hated betrayal the most. After so many years, I have always regretted it. If I could have been with you at that time, you wouldn't have been so cold to me, right? Who gave you this illusion?" Beligaju sneered mockingly. He casually picked up a teacup and played with it in his hand. Perhaps it was because of his temperament, it always made people feel that he was not holding a teacup, but a chess piece in a decisive battle. Especially when he was standing by the window, looking at everything outside with his dark eyes, like a superior waiting for an opportunity to strike, about to start a beautiful battle. Yun Biluo's face turned pale from his words, but she still refused to give up. "I know it's difficult to get your Highness forgiveness, but anyone who sees a child with golden eyes will be scared. You were too violent at that time, more terrifying than a pack of wolves. I didn't want to leave you behind, I just wanted to call for help." At that time, His Highness, who was covered in blood, was too scary. A child who was only 10 years old actually stood in the bloodstains and laughed as if he enjoyed the slaughter. How could there be such a person in this world? Only a monster would do that. However, later on, that child became more and more honorable. Only then did she realize that she seemed to have made a mistake. But didn't she take the initiative to apologize? Why didn't His Highness give her a chance? Yun Biluo twisted the handkerchief in her hand and bit hard on her thin lips. "Then what about Hellion Vivian? She was more afraid of you at that time, hiding whenever she saw you. Has your Highness forgotten all these?" Upon hearing this, Beligaju's fingers that were playing with the porcelain cup paused. A loud bang was heard. The courtyard door seemed to have been knocked open by something, making a loud noise. Countless infantrymen rushed in and stood at the entrance. Beligaju did not even look at Yunbiluo. His eyes met with the magistrate who barged in. He was still as cold as a celestial, and the smile in his eyes deepened. Under that smile there was a hint of profoundness. It seems that I haven't been angry for a long time. What a pity, I'm not in a good mood today. As he spoke, he slowly twisted his left hand, and a fierce martial chi suddenly rose in the air. The soldiers who barged in did not have time to see the man's movement clearly. In just a moment, all the intruders exploded at the same time, and hot blood splattered everywhere. Miserable cries filled the entire inferior compound. Dozens of soldiers exploded at the same time, and blood and flesh splattered all over the magistrate in the distance. The magistrate's hands and feet trembled, and even his breathing was difficult. His face was pale and his teeth were chattering. He almost knelt on the spot. However, he realized that he couldn't move at all. He could only watch as the demon-like man walked towards him step by step. "Why didn't you say anything when you came to see me, Your Highness?" The man curled his thin lips and whispered with a smile. However, such a smile was like a deadly curse to the magistrate. The face in front of him was too handsome. Compared to that, what was more unforgettable was the oppressive aura that he exuded. This caused his handsomeness to become somewhat cold, like a top-notch treasured sword that was about to be unsheathed. At this moment, the deafening sound of horse hooves came from outside the door. The sound was very loud, and it must have been thousands of horses to create such a loud sound. Zhongguan Iron Horse had arrived. This was a true massacre of an army at the gates. Emperor Murong was not as stupid as the magistrate who stood so close to Beligaju. Instead, he rode a war horse and stood a few meters away. He faced Beligaju from a distance. He did not want to be recognized, so his face was covered. Rows of archers stood in front of him to guard against Beligaju's surprise attack. However, Bailey Jiaju only looked at him and smiled coldly, just like a high and mighty demon god who was looking down at the ant-like existence of humans. His chilly aura made the surrounding soldiers somewhat timid. "Murong Wang, you really have a lot of guts. Aren't you afraid that I will exterminate your entire family?" Chapter 402. Emperor Murong was enraged by his arrogance. He no longer hid his identity and tore off the mask on his face. He looked into Beligaju's eyes with a cold smile. "Your Highness wants to kill 9 generations of your family, but you need to be alive to escape. Based on the current situation, do you think you can escape? Even the shadows you sent out were turned back. Now the entire Green Dragon army is under my control. If you're really smart, you should obediently allow yourself to be captured. Otherwise, the people around you will suffer together with you. After all, the arrows have no eyes." Beligaju did not speak. The shadows, on the other hand, did not waver. Their handsome faces were calm and their eyes were burning. Beligaju did not let them protect him. Instead, he took a step forward. He walked slowly and elegantly, so much so that the people around him forgot to draw the bows in their hands. "Do you really think that I will allow you to attack without making any preparations?" At this moment, the cold and indifferent voice was like the cry of a superior weapon. Emperor Murong disagreed. "Your Highness is talking about preparation. Are you going to the other barracks to ask for help? It's useless. No one will send their troops." The young master had personally ordered that all the barracks under the 4 great families were not to leave the barracks by even half a meter. This time Bailey Jiaju must die without a doubt. "Who told you that no one will send their troops?" Suddenly, a cold and languid voice came from the thin mist in the west. "Who's there?" Emperor Murong, who was interrupted, was a little impatient. He waved his hand and all the archers raised their hands and aimed at the black fog. The voice only disappeared for a second before it was heard again. "It's me." A white fog rose and a slender figure gradually appeared. Her straight and slender legs were more beautiful than a model's. She stepped in the billowing smoke. Her black robe fluttered in the wind, revealing a unique handgun at her waist. Her top-notch streamlined figure shone with low-key luxury. That figure stood in the white fog for a long time. The corners of his mouth were slightly curved, and he had an indescribable evil charm. However, no one could see his appearance clearly. He could only vaguely see her slender fingers lazily caressing Gunshot's body. She looked at Beligaju, who was not far away, with a faint smile. Her temperament was one, and it was shocking. Behind her, a row of people could be faintly seen. That row of people were all dressed in black armor. They did not have blades in their hands. Instead, they stood tall and slender. Their speed was as fast as lightning. Often people would overlook their appearance. Looking from afar, they looked like a huge black mountain. The soldiers began to panic, their hands trembling as they held onto their bows. It's the flag. It turned out that the black color that was waving above the soldiers was a huge flag. There were only 3 words written on the flag. Hidden Army. Hidden Army. That's. The magistrate could no longer speak. His legs gave way and he took a heavy step back. Anyone who had been in the army would know that the Hidden Army was the Hidden Army. Emperor Murong's eyes opened wider and wider as Hellion Vivian approached. It was as if he had seen an emissary from hell. Murong Chongfeng, who was standing beside Emperor Murong, seemed to have stopped breathing at that moment. There was amazement and shock. But more than that, there was an unknown fear. Just when everyone thought that the Hidden Army had disappeared with the change of Hellion family's owner, it actually appeared without any warning. And the person leading it, Murong Chongfeng, suddenly raised his head and looked at the slender figure's face. It's her. It's actually her. Murong Chongfeng's eyes shook violently. All these years, the reason why he allowed the people around him to bully Hellion Vivian was because she was a fool. In the future, she would not be able to help him in any way. That was why he listened to his father's orders and thought of ways to divorce her. But now, she actually became the leader of the Hidden Army. A huge sense of regret welled up in his heart. He could not hide it no matter how hard he tried. It turned out that he had long regretted it. However, those regrets had never been as strong as now. Yun Biluo, who was standing at the corner, looked at the scene in front of her. Her small face turned pale. She thought that Hellion Vivian left because she listened to her. Why did she appear here with the Hidden Army? How did she get such a powerful army? Yun Biluo bit her thin lips. She was just saying that Hellion Vivian was a coward and ran away. But now, she felt like she had been slapped in the face. Emperor Murong was not as flustered as the others. So what if the other party was the Hidden Army? No matter how powerful they were, they could not win against them in terms of numbers. When Emperor Murong thought of his backup troops, he sneered at Hellion Weiwei. This time, you've really opened my eyes, you piece of trash. You're too kind. No one was a match for Hellion Vivian when it came to throwing and tugging. She looked at Emperor Murong and smiled handsomely. This is only the beginning. I'll beat you until you're crying for your parents. Then you'll fully understand what a godly weapon is. Emperor Murong's face darkened. He was so angry that his teeth chattered. It's still not certain who will win. You want to fight against an army of tens of thousands with just 100 people? You're so stupid that it's pathetic. Pathetic? Hellion Weiwei stroked the gun in her hand, curled her lips into a smile and said leisurely, "You're the one who's pitifully stupid. Have you ever thought about why not a single soldier from the other military camps has entered the city since you brought your soldiers into the city?" If Hellion Vivian did not ask, Emperor Murong would not have realized the problem. But now that she asked, Emperor Murong's face changed completely. It was terrifyingly pale. He pulled a soldier beside him and growled, "Where are the soldiers from the other military camps?" I don't know. The soldier was trembling in fear. Emperor Murong pushed him away forcefully and scolded, "Useless." At this moment, a soldier ran over in a panic. The hat on his head was slightly crooked. He was panting as he spoke, Your Highness, there are enemy troops outside the city. We're not sure which military camp they are from. Our reinforcements have been surrounded by them and are blocked outside the city." "What are you panicking for?" Murong Wang slapped him across the face. This soldier's words had lowered their morale. He waved his sleeves and suppressed the panic in his heart. He sneered and said, "Everyone listen up. Even if the enemy is the Hidden Army, they only have 100 people. We have tens of thousands of soldiers. It's impossible for them to defeat us. Don't worry. Raise the arrows in your hands. Each of you only needs to shoot one arrow to defeat them. Is that so?" Hellion Vivian heard his words and raised her beautiful eyebrows. She looked at little bald head who had been following behind her and smiled wickedly. "Little Seven, go get third sister-in-law's gun. Since His Highness wants to bully us with numbers, We can only change our weapons. Chapter 403. The little seventh prince nodded his head in a dignified manner. Then he bent down and picked up a black object. He lifted it up and handed it to Hellion Wei Wei. The length of the object was almost longer than the little seventh prince. When it stood upright, it could reach the little one's nose. It seemed to be made of metal and looked extremely heavy. Before anyone realized what it was, Hellion Wei Wei lifted it up with a force. With a smile on her face, she commanded, "Hidden army, listen up. All of you switch to the 18-round heavy impact machine guns." Then the crowd heard a series of clicking sounds. All the soldiers in black raised their arms. Their left hand was a support and their right hand was holding a black pipe. "Is this the equipment you were talking about?" Emperor Murong laughed. Obviously he did not like the thing that looked like a bamboo pipe. Even the 18 black shadows were looking at each other. They couldn't understand why Wang Fei would take out such a child's toy. Only Beligaju's beautiful eyes darkened when he saw the black pipe. He looked at Hellion Vivian with his dark eyes and did not show any emotion. At this moment, Hellion Vivian picked up the sniper rifle and placed it on her shoulder. She adjusted the aiming device. Then with an evil smile she pressed the button. Boom! There was a flash of red light and the sturdy roof was lifted. 5 to 6 archers fell from their hiding place. The tiles rolled on the bluestone path and made an unbelievable deafening sound. Amidst the billowing smoke, the magistrate's expression was already sluggish. His mouth was wide open as he stared blankly at the woman who was walking towards them with a black spear on her shoulder. His legs, which were already weak to begin with, had now lost all feeling in them. "What is that?" The magistrate was out of control. Even his voice was close to shouting, "What is that fucking bomb?" Emperor Murong's face was filled with confusion and a chill from the bottom of his heart. He wanted to ask too. How could she blow up the house with just a lift of her hand? Was it like an explosive? But how did she put the explosive into the black pipe? How did she ignite it in an instant? At that moment, many thoughts flashed through Murong Wang's mind. But the only thing that was fixed in place was that they were finished. Even if they had tens of thousands of soldiers, it was impossible to win. How could he possibly win? Why had no one ever told him? Was there such a weapon on the divine land? What the hell was that thing? However, this was not the end. At the same time, countless well-trained hidden soldiers fired at the same time. Every shot hit the foot of the soldiers and countless sparks flew. Amidst the thick smoke, Hellion Vivian walked casually and handsomely. She casually passed one of the special sniper cannons to Little Seven. The little seventh prince stretched out his small hands and caught it firmly. He held it in his arms and followed behind Hellion Vivian. His small face was calm and there was not a trace of expression. He would attack whoever he was unhappy with. He was very mighty and domineering. The archers who were lying in ambush at the prefectural magistrate's side were all scared out of their wits. Not only did Hellion Vivian's attack make them not dare to act rashly, even the weapons in the hands of the hidden soldiers made them feel weak in the knees. They could no longer raise the bows in their hands. Not only was the opponent faster than them, even the accuracy of their shots was much higher than theirs. There was still the terrifying smoke around their feet. No matter how much Murong Wang roared, the archers maintained the same posture. Murong Wang, who had planned carefully for so long and thought that victory was in his grasp, was completely flustered at this moment. He looked at the figure that was getting closer and closer to him. He could not help but drag a soldier to stand in front of him. But in the next second the soldier was shot dead. Fresh blood gradually dripped down his face. The corner of the woman's mouth was slightly curved. Her white dress was fluttering wildly in the hot wind. The night Rakshas's beautiful wings were flapping wildly. Her beautiful face reflected a seductive red, with undisguised arrogance and confidence. No matter how beautiful the color was, it was just a foil in front of her. Thump. The prefectural magistrate could not hold it in any longer. He knelt on the ground, crying and shouting, "Princess, please spare my life, please spare my life." It was over, it was completely over. What would the group of archers do now that the commander has surrendered? One by one they put down the bows in their hands and knelt 10 miles away. It was a magnificent scene. Hellion Vivian was still holding the sniper cannon in her hand. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the prefectural magistrate. She said lazily, "It's useless for you to beg me. You should beg His Highness. The prefectural magistrate was stunned and looked in the direction of Beligaju. That man, even though he was in the midst of the billowing smoke, was not stained by the dust. The elegant cloak draped over his shoulders made him look like an emperor who held the power of life and death in his hands. The more he was in a situation like this, the colder and more dangerous he looked. It was as if he was born to be a god who killed the world, giving people an absolute sense of oppression. The prefectural magistrate trembled in fear. In front of Hellion Vivian he still dared to beg for mercy. But in front of this man he kept kowtowing. The sound was so loud that it was painful to hear. Beligaju did not even look at him. His eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's small face. Hellion Vivian did not understand why he was looking at her like this. She frowned. Come here. No matter how much the world was tormented, the royal family's tone was always commanding, leisurely and indifferent. Hellion Vivian looked at the surrounding students and the archers who had just surrendered. She could not ignore Beligaju's feelings. She carried her gun and walked over. Her posture was quite handsome. But before she could finish her handsomeness, Beligaju lifted her chin. Hellion Vivian's long and narrow eyes widened in an instant. She looked like a silly fox who had been bitten by a tiger. Wait a minute. Was this guy thinking of kissing her here? It turned out that Hellion Vivian was thinking too much. Because the royal family saw that her face was dirty, they threw her a handkerchief and asked her to wipe herself. Hellion Vivian was speechless. Holding a gun with one hand and wiping her face with the other, she still did such a stupid thing. A certain someone who was obsessed with cleanliness was always so crazy. Hellion Vivian pursed her lips helplessly as she wiped her face. Beligaju looked at her and reached out to grab her hand. Holding it in his palm, his thin lips curled up. His deep eyes looked more charming than ever. His sexy voice rose slightly. What were you looking forward to just now? No, Chapter 404. The man suddenly leaned forward and kissed Hellion Vivian before she could finish her sentence. The refreshing scent that came from his mouth made Hellion Vivian feel a lack of oxygen in her brain for the first time in her life. While her head was numb, she could only hear the obvious gasps around her and the dry and steady heartbeat of the other party. The whole sky seemed to be spinning. Beligaju parted slightly with the help of her strength. He grabbed her wrist with one hand and did not loosen his grip on her other hand. He went around her back and pressed the back of Hellion Vivian's head forward. He deepened the kiss as if no one was around. Everyone was dumbfounded. They never thought that the noble and pure royal family would kiss anyone. Yun Biluo's face was even paler. She clenched her fists so tightly that they almost pierced into her palms. Her pair of eyes that were always gentle and harmless were filled with jealousy. A slightly cool sensation exploded on the tip of her tongue. Hellion Wei awkwardly wanted to retreat, but he gently swept the coating on her tongue and slowly sucked on it. Hellion Wei's whole body trembled like a cooked prawn. She curled up in his embrace, her fingers trembling, yet she couldn't move. The sound of friction between the clothes seemed to be much louder when they rubbed against each other. However, Beligaju did not restrain himself. Instead, he kissed her harder as if he wanted to suck all the air in her mouth. Hellion Vivian's legs gradually lost their strength. Her body was almost like a puddle of water. There was nowhere to run because of his invasiveness. She didn't know when she dropped the gun in her hand. By the time she reacted, her fingers were tugging at Bailey Jiaju's clothes. The corners of her eyes were red as she threw herself on his shoulder, gasping for air. Beligaju reached out and pulled her into his arms. His fingers trailed along her back. His whole body was filled with the pleasant smell of elegant sandalwood. If you run around again, I'll break your claws. It was a threat, but there was no coldness in it. Instead, his deep and sexy voice brought out patient gentleness. It made Hellion Vivian feel like her ears were about to get pregnant. The little seventh prince looked at this scene and thought that when he had a wife in the future he would also kiss her on the battlefield. Don't ask him why, he was just that capricious. The hidden army that Hellion Vivian had brought along looked at each other in shock. However, King Murong wanted to use this opportunity to get rid of Beligaju. He grabbed the soldier's bow and arrow. Just as he was about to pull the bowstring, he was knocked off his horse by the seventh prince's cannonball. A rumbling sound rang out. No matter how powerful Murong Wang was, he could not withstand such powerful firepower. His entire body was sent flying and slammed heavily onto the ground. You really don't have good eyesight. The little seventh prince lifted the cannon in his hand and walked over coolly. He lifted his foot and stepped on Murong Wang's body. Puff. King Murong felt a sharp pain in his chest and blood spurted out of his mouth. Seeing this, the soldiers behind him put down their weapons and knelt on the ground. They shouted, "Your Highness, please spare our lives." Hellion Vivian looked at this scene with satisfaction. She was the one who had caused trouble for Beligaju. Naturally, she should be the one to settle it. However, she seemed to be too arrogant. Hellion Wei Wei curved her thin lips, her pretty eyebrows and eyes curved. So what if she was arrogant? She wanted to use this method to tell the world. The Hellion clan was going to rise again. She, Hellion Vivian, was going to take back everything that belonged to her. Amidst the billowing smoke, Beligaju hugged her and sat on the peak of the mountain. He looked down at the thousands of soldiers below him. His expression was indifferent and his eyes were noble. His black hair and white robes were tangled together. It was as if a god had descended. Hellion Vivian leaned on him lazily. Her long and narrow phoenix eyes were slightly raised. She looked like a hedonistic playboy. Looking at the two of them, it was easy to think of a sentence. This is the land of thousands of miles. If you lose, I will rise again with you. If you win, I will accompany you to rule the world. Hearing the loud chants of long live, the curtain of a sophisticated siege came to an end. King Murong and Crown Prince Murong were imprisoned. Beligaju had his reasons for not killing them. Hellion Vivian knew that he wanted to wait until everything was over before bringing them to the imperial court. If they were to be dealt with now, only the Murong family would suffer. However, if they were to be brought to the imperial court, all the soldiers who did not send their troops would be pulled out one by one and executed. The imperial court would welcome an even greater change of personnel. Faintly, the people could only smell a message. The Empress's power had been weakened too quickly. It was so fast that the people did not even have time to react. When they looked up, the positions of the important officials had been replaced by the people of the royal family. The four great families were beginning to panic. Master. When the matter was almost settled, the fire Qilin revealed its original form and knelt on the ground. It asked respectfully, should the army lying in ambush around the school remain and await orders, or should we retreat with the Princess Consort's hidden army? Bailey Jiaju unhurriedly tidied up his sleeves and uttered a few simple words. Go back? Yes. After receiving the order, the fire Qilin disappeared in a flash, just like how it had come. Under the dusk, Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju's excessively handsome face and raised her eyebrows. You have an ambush at Green Dragon Mountain? Yes. Beligaju did not intend to hide it from her. Hellion Vivian's heart skipped a beat. How many? 30,000. His tone was still indifferent. Hellion Vivian realized that even if she did not appear with the hidden army, this man would not be in any danger. This was because he already had a plan in mind, including Emperor Murong's rebellion and the tens of thousands of soldiers lying in ambush outside. If Hellion Vivian and the rest did not come with the hidden army's flag, they would have been targeted by this man's ambush. You brought soldiers to Green Dragon Mountain? Hellion Wei Wei asked probingly. A prince leading troops out of the capital and so on. If word got out, it wouldn't be too good. He wasn't afraid that someone would accuse him of treason. Beligaju's answer was very casual. Just a few servants. Hellion Vivian was speechless. That was an army of 30,000, not 3,000. She had never seen a master who could treat 30,000 soldiers as servants. However, while Bailey Jiaju was answering her question, he was still able to order Shadow. Go and tell everyone that I don't want to hear any rumors about the hidden army appearing in the White Academy in the future. Chapter 405. The hidden army looked at each other. What did he mean by rumor? They had clearly shown up. They did not expect the young master to agree with the third prince. Of course, Hellion Vivian would agree. Now was not the time to let others know that she had already obtained the hidden army. She had not prepared all the weapons yet. If she showed off too much, it would be easy for others to notice. You come here, Beligaju spoke again. His tone was a little indifferent, making it hard to read his emotions. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and followed him into the room. Just as she turned around, he pressed her against the door frame. Tell me, who allowed you to leave? I went to get help, not leave, Hellion Vivian said and smiled. Otherwise, how could I save the damsel in distress? Beligaju pressed against her. Save the damsel in distress? Wasn't I handsome just now? Hellion Vivian yawned lazily and looked at Beligaju. She wanted to walk out of the shadow that he had created. Frankly speaking, I stood up for you this time. Are you very grateful to me? Beligaju nodded and pulled her back. He slowly lowered his body and stared at Hellion Vivian. His soft ink-black eyes could easily make people sink into a deep pool. Hellion Vivian was a little uncomfortable under his gaze. Just as she was about to open her mouth, the heat that covered her lips instantly took away her words. The hand that fell on the side of her face was now holding her chin. Her lips were licked, her teeth were invaded, and he was teasing her mouth. He was obviously a cold person, but he could actually arouse such heat. From his mouth to his body and the arms behind her back, it caused a strange sensation in her heart. Beligaju, you can't. She tried to move her lips away, but the stirring of her tongue turned her words into a murmur until they melted between the two of them. The moist heat and the scorching breath reduced her resistance. She could not resist Beligaju's kiss at all. Can't? Beligaju moved away slightly as if to refute her words. He didn't allow her to breathe and once again devoured her lips. His fingers slipped into her clothes and his deep voice was hoarse. Your body doesn't say so. She didn't know if it was because of the slightly cold temperature of his fingers, or because of his words. Hellion Wei Wei only felt that both of her legs were weak. She weakly endured his kiss and his embrace, and her consciousness also started to uncontrollably drift to the distance. Aju, I heard. The sudden noise woke up the two people who were intoxicated. Hellion Vivian came out from Beligaju's arms and glanced at Tu Sufeng. She rubbed her thin lips with the back of her hand and her breath was still a little unstable. I'll go out first. You guys talk. Beligaju didn't have the slightest shame of being caught red-handed. He reached out and tidied his collar, then looked at Tu Sufeng. Next time you come in, knock on the door first. Tu Sufeng smiled gently. I thought that a kid like you who would feel dirty even if someone touched you, would never be enlightened. I didn't expect that. How is it? Is it exciting to do this in the academy? Feels good. Beligaju sat on the chaise lounge with his legs slightly crossed. His tone was cold. But a 10,000-year bachelor like you can't understand this feeling. Tu Sufeng felt like he was shot in the knee. The corner of his mouth twitched. This icy kid, his mouth is still as poisonous as ever. Murong family, what do you plan to do? Tu Sufeng sat down and prepared to talk business. Beligaju curved his thin lips and the smile in his eyes faded. Of course I'll uproot them so that those disobedient old men can live in peace. The rest of the people were indeed in peace. Because they didn't expect Beligaju to survive. They chose not to send troops because even they thought that Emperor Murong would succeed this time. Who would have thought? Oh, who would have thought? They made the wrong bet. The people on the fifth prince's side were almost completely annihilated. The emperor's uncle rebelled and the empress was also unlucky. She was completely removed from her position as empress and was imprisoned in the dungeon, never to see the light of day again. Hellion Guangyao saw this and only regret was left in his heart. He frowned at the secret guard who came to report. Who sent the troops to the third prince and let him break out of the siege? The secret guard shook his head. I'm not sure, but it seems that the royal family was already on guard. That means that Murong has been too careless this time. Hellion Guangyao didn't ask more when he heard that there was an ambush. Instead he looked up and said, the clan meeting is about to begin. From today onwards keep an eye on the madam. Don't let her notice anything. I still need the Su family. Yes. The secret guard lowered his eyes. He knew that the madam couldn't know what the old master had been doing recently. Otherwise it would definitely be a mess. Hellion Guangyao stood up and was about to leave. Also send some gifts to the heads of each family. When the clan meeting starts, let them remember to choose me. Yes, sir. The secret guard finished and looked up again. But there's a stubborn old man that I can't handle. He seems to be bent on choosing the eldest Mississippi. Hellion Guangyao sneered. I know who you're talking about. Don't worry about him. He's just a second-class handicap who followed the old master on the battlefield. Now that his leg is broken, he can't even stand properly. Every time the clan meeting starts, there will be 11 people making decisions. He alone can't change the situation. Moreover, I've already found someone to contact the Hidden Army. The Hidden Army? The secret guard looked up and his eyes suddenly brightened. Old master, you've contacted the hidden army? Helian Guangyao's face was filled with pride. I'm in contact. To ensure that nothing goes wrong, I want that little bastard to completely give up on fighting for power with me. You're wise, old master. The secret guard praised loudly. Helian Guangyao smiled and waved his sleeves confidently. It was night. A cool breeze blew and the stars twinkled. Helian Vivian looked at the paper in her hand and smiled wickedly. She said to the person who delivered the letter, "Tell Qi Yan that since he wants the hidden army so badly, give him one." Yes. The person saw the smile on his young master's face and knew that she was up to no good. He did not say much and flew out of the White Academy after receiving the news. After settling the official business, Helian Vivian planned to see how the things that she asked He Eyes to prepare for her were going. Just as she opened the door, she met with a pair of indifferent and narrow eyes. "Where are you going?" Taking a walk, Helian Vivian felt that it was not a good decision to look for He Eyes today, so she silently retracted her leg. Baligaju smiled, his eyes turned dark brown. "Is that so?" "Yes." Helian Wei Wei smiled, her expression was very sincere. Baligaju leaned lazily against the door frame and glanced at the package in her hand. "This is the first time I know that you need to carry this thing for a walk." Chapter 406. I'll feel more secure if there's something accompanying me. Helian Wei Wei didn't know that she was so good at lying. Baligaju looked at Helian Vivian and slowly took a step forward. Suddenly his thin lips curled up. "So madam has been hinting at me to accompany you." Helian Vivian was speechless. "That's great. I have time today. Tell me, where do you want to go?" Baligaju bent down and slid his slender fingers across the collar on her neck. It seemed that if she didn't tell him the truth, he would change to another thing and lock her up. Helian Vivian, who didn't plan to go for a walk, could only choose a place in the White Academy that was the furthest away from He Eyes. The back of the mountain. The back of the mountain? Baligaju frowned. "There are too many mosquitoes." Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. "You shouldn't be afraid of mosquitoes if you bring Fire Qilin out. Besides, would mosquitoes, these fragile creatures, dare to get close to you? They wouldn't be ready to suck blood and would be frozen into pieces by you, okay? The two of us are going for a walk. Why do we need to bring other things?" Baligaju looked at her and said matter-of-factly. Helian Vivian was speechless. What should she do? She actually didn't know what to say. "Then let's go to the academy. There are fewer people." Helian Vivian knew that he didn't like crowded places. This time His Highness didn't have any objections. The air in ancient times was very good, especially at night. The scenery was good and the wind was very comfortable. The restlessness in Helian Vivian's body seemed to have been soothed a lot. The chirping of insects could be heard all around and fireflies could be seen dancing in the grass. Helian Wei Wei's entire body was relaxed, her eyes were filled with laziness. Baligaju looked at her and pointed at the green tiles of the academy. "Do you want to go up?" "Okay." Helian Vivian nodded. She had been here for so long, but she had never been on the roof of an ancient building. Baligaju stretched out his hand and stopped her. With a light tap of his foot, he was standing on the roof with Helian Vivian in his arms. "Be careful, your feet will slip." "So professional." Helian Vivian chuckled and paced back and forth. Then she sat on the edge of the room and leaned back. Looking at the night sky, he lazily patted the spot beside him. "This angle is not bad. Lie down and take a look." Baligaju originally wanted to say that it was dirty, but when he saw the smile on her small face, he swallowed back the words he wanted to say. His lean figure was like a painting when he casually laid down. Helian Vivian looked at him and sighed in her heart. This kind of man was really born to harm women. As if he noticed her gaze, Baligaju rested his head on his arm and smiled arrogantly that Helian Vivian had never seen before. "So comfortable." Helian Vivian put her hands behind her head and looked at the night sky. There were no such bright stars in the modern world. "I haven't seen the Big Dipper in a long time. How did you find such a good place?" Baligaju listened to her voice and closed his eyes. His long black eyelashes cast a shadow and his voice carried a bit of indifference. "When I was young, I often went up on the roof." "Go up on the roof." This didn't seem to be in line with His Highness' style. Shouldn't someone like him be sitting in a luxurious palace and giving orders? Beligaju glanced at Hellion Vivian's face and knew what she was thinking. This highness is also a human. I also need to rest. Rest on the roof? What kind of hobby was this? Bailey Jiaju glanced at her from the corner of his eyes and said, I like to stand at a higher place. Hellion Vivian. You are indeed more suited to be the second generation of the Emperor. You are born to be the Emperor. Then when you are resting, what do you usually think about? Beligaju turned the black jade ring on his little finger and the corners of his mouth carried a frivolous smile. Who am I going to kill next? Hellion Vivian. Are you really resting? What? Scared? Beligaju turned his handsome face and his thin lips slightly curved. His pitch-black eyes were so deep that no one could see any trace of emotion. Hellion Vivian stretched and was somewhat indifferent. As long as you don't kill me, it's fine. The main thing is, aren't you tired? You think about killing people all day even when you are resting. Tired? Bailey Jiaju chuckled softly as he casually hooked a strand of Hellion Wei Wei's hair with his fingers. His fair fingers intertwined with her ink-black hair. The sudden contrast made the white look whiter and the black look darker as they intertwined together. Accompanied by a low and gentle voice, they outlined the scene of a spring night, warm but hazy and elusive. How could this be? What an interesting game. However, he would get bored after playing too much. His prey was more interesting. Therefore, he must not let her know what he was like when he was at his most brutal. You treat everything as a game. Hellion Vivian shook her head and yawned again. The two of them chatted and Hellion Vivian unknowingly fell asleep on the roof. When she woke up, it was dawn. The night was cold and the two of them couldn't help but hug each other tightly for warmth. Perhaps it was because of the change of environment, she didn't know when she returned to the room. She was probably carried back by Beligaju. Hellion Vivian took a while before her brain woke up. Then she realized that she was staring at the man. Because of the difference in height, Hellion Vivian turned her head and her gaze fell on his chest. Beligaju wasn't wearing any clothes and his figure was too good to be true. His skin was delicate and soft and his smooth lines were very clear. He was like a fine piece of jade, but at the same time he had all the sexiness that belonged to a man. Hellion Vivian, who was about to explode at night, saw this scene and her throat tightened. She told herself in her heart to stop looking. However, her gaze unconsciously moved down. Her long black hair covered the bed like a waterfall, gently drifting past her waist, revealing her sexy and perfect Apollo's belt, as well as her long straight legs that could be vaguely seen even though she was covered by the quilt. Hellion Vivian resisted the urge to sit on him. She took a deep breath and planned to get up first. However, he reached out and pressed her back onto the couch. He lowered his eyes and looked at her. His long black hair fell down like clear streams of water falling on her neck. It felt cool and gentle, refreshing her heart. His pale lips were as beautiful as the petals of the morning, and the deep and light colors in his eyes were so beautiful that it made her heart palpitate. Hellion Vivian's breathing became a little hurried. Looking at this face from afar, she couldn't take it anymore. At such a close distance, she felt that her body couldn't take it anymore. Her heart was beating a little faster and the blood flowing in her veins was warm. At this moment, Beligaju was like a demon prince who lived in the deep sea and bewitched humans. Moreover, why was he suddenly so close to her? In the next moment, Hellion Vivian understood. Chapter 407. Beligaju didn't raise his head. His delicate kisses fell on her fair neck as if he was tasting the sweetest pastry. Hellion Vivian's fingers couldn't help but tremble from the waves of numbing heat. However, she knew that at this time she really wasn't suited for such intimate actions. She flipped over and stood up from the bed. Bailey Jiaju raised his eyebrows and looked at the young girl in front of him. Clean and stubborn, a pair of limpid eyes softly looked at him, making people's hearts couldn't help but slightly tremble. A deep dark color gushed out from the depths of Bailey Jiaju's eyes. He liked to talk to her. However, he liked to see her tremble even more. He couldn't help but want to get closer. He couldn't help but want to hold on tighter. It should be done tonight. He wanted to see how long she could endure. Bailey Jiaju smiled faintly. His raised eyebrows and slightly narrowed eyes were filled with a sense of black-bellied. Hellion Vivian didn't care about Beligaju anymore. She only wanted to find Hei's quickly and ask for the maids who were guarding her in case anything went wrong. I've already prepared everything for you. He eyes smiled meaningfully. However, do you really plan to hold on by yourself? Helian Wei Wei replied with a and packed up all the things that she needed. He eyes looked behind her and raised his eyebrows. I'm afraid some people won't agree, ? Helian Vivian just raised her head. An arm wrapped around her waist and pulled her back forcefully. Beligaju was behind her. He coldly said to He eyes, stay away from her in the future. Otherwise you know very well what this highness will do to you. For example, that little green plum of yours. He eyes. Fuck, does this count as him getting shot while lying down? And Bailey Jiaju, who had dragged Helian Wei Wei away, directly pressed her against a corner. With one hand propped against the wall, the light in his eyes slightly deepened. Come, tell me, why in the world do you always look for Haze? Yes. Helian Vivian touched her wrist, which was hurting. Ask him for help to get a few mates. Tonight is the night of the full moon. I need them. Beligaju was so jealous that he was about to bubble. He gritted his teeth and said, you have my mark on you, and then you talked about dual cultivation with another man? I just asked him for help. Helian Vivian was obviously lacking in confidence, although she didn't know why she lacked confidence. Beligaju narrowed his eyes dangerously. How could this person dare to say such words at this point? Could it be that he had not expressed himself clearly enough? Very, very good. He wanted to see how long it would take for that thick head of hers to be enlightened. He was really too good to this little thing. How could she forget that some people had to stab her a few times before she would understand what self-reflection was? Helian Vivian didn't know what he meant by that. However, when it was time for lunch, she saw that there were two girls beside the royal family, who usually didn't eat in public. Both of those girls were very delicate and pretty. They probably felt that the third prince was very easy to get close to today. Once they came in, they smiled at everyone. So they couldn't help but want to talk to him. After all, the selection of the secondary consort was about to begin. Beligaju didn't talk to them, but he didn't drive them away either. The two girls thought that their chance had come. They slightly lowered their eyes and blushed. This was the scene that Helian Wei Wei saw when she came in. Bailey Jiaju was sitting opposite those two young girls, like a moon surrounded by a myriad of stars. She tried hard to suppress the discomfort in her heart. She took the bamboo chopsticks from He eyes and ate a few mouthfuls of rice, but she didn't have much appetite. But she knew that she had to eat. Otherwise, how could she have the strength to resist the tormenting full moon night? He eyes rested his chin on his hands on the table and watched with interest as Helian Vivian's coldness increased rapidly. He followed her gaze and found the third prince. Then he found that the third prince was calmly dealing with people, but his eyes were always glued to his little sister's back. He eyes smiled and raised his thin lips. Interesting, really interesting. However, he didn't want Helian Vivian to notice anything. The third prince was too cunning. He couldn't let Vivian fall into his trap. Helian Vivian felt that she needed to be alone. After eating, she simply carried her self-made fishing rod and ran to the back of the mountain, preparing to bait the fish in the pond. Little seventh prince saw it and walked over with his two short legs. Third sister-in-law, what are you doing? Fishing. Helian Vivian tugged at the fishing rod. That's strange. It's been almost an hour and not a single fish has taken the bait. Third sister-in-law, let me try. The little seventh prince's face was full of vigor, looking very confident. Helian Vivian passed the fishing rod to him. In less than a second, the fish came up. It was very big and very fat. When Wei Wei looked at that fish, her indolent face was covered with dark clouds in a flash. She only saw one after another big fish with plump figures in the previously empty fish basket cheerfully swaying back and forth. Each and every one of their big mouths opened and closed as if they were provoking her. What's the big deal? Helian Vivian leaned over and looked at the big fish jumping around in the basket. The corner of her mouth slightly raised. You fish are too open to lust. You don't know how to be reserved when you see a handsome young man. No wonder you became someone's meal. As she said this, she patted little seventh prince's shoulder. With a serious expression she said, not bad, you used the handsome young man trick very well. Little seventh prince. Helian Vivian touched her chin as if she thought of something. She suddenly smiled. Little seventh prince, go and get 2 of the explosives that I developed a few days ago. After a while, there was a rumbling sound. 2 muffled explosions sounded from the mountain behind the White Academy. A few shadow guards who followed Helian Vivian appeared when they heard the sound. Smelling the thick smell of gunpowder, they looked towards the pond. The fishes were all frightened and jumped out of the water as if they had seen a demon. The princess consort was looking at the pond with a smug expression. The seventh prince was looking up at her with eyes full of worship. Drops of cold sweat appeared on the foreheads of the shadow guards at the same time. They all felt that their princess consort was not in a good mood today. Not in a good mood? Beligaju, who was leaning on the bush, listened to the subordinate's report. His thin lips curved, and then he followed Hellion Vivian, who was tidying up the fish basket. Hellion Vivian of course knew that someone was following behind her. She stopped and looked at him. "Your Highness, why are you following me instead of choosing a secondary consort?" "There are no secondary consorts." Beligaju's voice was indifferent. Hellion Vivian smiled. "Weren't there two just now?" "They came over on their own initiative." When Beligaju spoke, it always made people feel that he was smiling, so someone has to hurry up. Otherwise, the position will be taken away. Chapter 408. Then let it be snatched away. Hellion Vivian's tone was slow. "I don't like to snatch things from others the most." Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian in front of him, and the smile on his face suddenly turned cold. His dark purple eyes were instantly tainted with evil. He pinched Hellion Vivian's chin and slowly reached out to press his thumb against Hellion Vivian's pale lips. He said, "Are you telling the truth now?" Hellion Vivian swallowed a mouthful of saliva because of Beligaju's actions. Beligaju chuckled softly. He gently stroked Hellion Vivian's thin lips and held Hellion Vivian's hands. "Don't even think about giving up this position." At this moment, Hellion Vivian once again experienced Beligaju's strength. Her hands seemed to be fixed halfway by iron, and she couldn't resist at all. Beligaju said, "Did you forget what I warned you?" Hellion Vivian stopped moving. "What?" Beligaju smiled. That smile was gentle no matter how one looked at it, but there was a hint of unhappiness in his eyes. He said, "If you lie to me, I'll remove your claws." "So what if it's a lie?" Hellion Vivian didn't even think and blurted out, "You'll still have a harem after all." Only after that did she realize what she had said. In an instant her neck, face and even the corners of her eyes turned red. After she reacted, she turned around and wanted to leave. She didn't want to look at that person's smug expression. But Beligaju was faster than her. He pulled her over, raised her chin and kissed her. "That's enough." Hearing the embarrassment in Hellion Vivian's voice, Beligaju finally bit his tongue before reluctantly withdrawing. He then lovingly leaned forward to lick Hellion Vivian's red eyes. His fingers gently rubbed the smooth skin on the inside of his palm as he waited for Hellion Vivian to calm her breathing. Hellion Vivian only felt her whole body go limp, comfortable and a little embarrassed. Beligaju smirked and touched her forehead. His eyes were deep. "Well, what is the truth you want to say?" Shao Qi, who was carrying the fish basket, raised his tiger head and looked at the two people in front of him. Then his gaze landed on Hellion Vivian. "Third sister-in-law, what happened to your face? Why is it so popular?" "The weather is too hot." Hellion Vivian vaguely explained, but her eyebrows furrowed. "Truth?" Beligaju knew that he couldn't force a certain kind of animal too close. His slender fingers loosened, and then he glanced at his strong-looking younger brother. He ordered in a calm voice, "Look after your third sister-in-law, don't let her wander around." Yes. Little seventh prince believed that he was invincible when it came to completing missions. Hellion Vivian didn't listen to the words of the adult and the child. After watching Beligaju's slender figure walk away, she casually found a cool patch of grass and lay down. She bit on the grass and began to think about life. As a responsible man, little seventh prince was very worried about his third sister-in-law being alone here. He decided to sacrifice the time he had to eat meat buns to accompany her. He strode with his short and thick legs and began to catch crickets around her. Hellion Vivian didn't know how she and Beligaju got to this point. They were just helping each other. But weren't they helping each other a little too thoroughly? Their previous kisses were all because of some things. But today, thinking of this, Hellion Vivian couldn't help but cover her mouth with one hand. The tips of her ears turned a little red. She could clearly feel that when Beligaju kissed her, there was some kind of surging emotion. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly went into a frenzy. Then it beat deafeningly and her chest felt sore and numb. As if she had been enlightened, many inadvertent scenes and details connected. The anxiety in his eyes when he looked at her, teasing her with half-truths, tricking her into signing the contract. Then what about her feelings for him? Helene Vivian lacked love in her previous life. She didn't even touch the line in the relationship between a man and a woman. Now that she thought about it, if he said like to her, Helene Vivian didn't have time to think before her heart reacted. It seemed to be a little uncomfortable, but it also beat very fast. Her face also felt a little hot. She had read about this before. It said that if a person liked the opposite sex, first of all, when she thought of him, her heart would beat faster. Then she wouldn't be able to resist the other party's kiss. Then after kissing, her face would turn red and her hands and feet would go soft. It seemed that it was all right. Her chest felt like it was stung by something. It was a little numb and also a little itchy. Helene Vivian rolled on the grass and reached out to cover her eyes. It seemed a little bad. Helene Vivian gasped for breath. Her heart was beating fast. She wanted to use her palm to cool down her hot cheeks, but found that her whole body's temperature was the same. It was so hot that her eyes almost overflowed with tears. An indescribable feeling came from an invisible place. It was like a small hook that pulled at her pulse. "Woman, it's almost dusk." Yuan Ming's voice sounded from the fantasy space. Helene Vivian stood up. Her breathing was a little fast. "I know what to do. From now on, you and Xiaobai will stay in the fantasy space. Don't come out again." "Wait, I'll say one last thing. You really don't want to consider." Yuan Ming didn't finish his words. Helene Vivian closed the fantasy space. She casually threw a piece of beef jerky to Xiao Qi and told him to play by himself. Then she called a few maids over and had them guard the back of the mountain. She walked towards the hot spring surrounded by clouds. But Helene Vivian still underestimated the effects of dual cultivation on the body. She didn't expect that it would be so painful before the sky turned dark. Helene Vivian didn't even take off her outer robes. She directly soaked herself in the water to cool down a little. However, she didn't know that a certain highness had been following behind her the whole time. "Are you going to move aside yourselves, or do you want me to do it?" Baligaju looked indifferently at the four maids in front of him. The maids glanced at each other. They were very loyal to Helene Vivian. Baligaju curved his thin lips and summoned the fire Qilin. "Block them. You also don't follow in. Do you understand?" He said the last three words very slowly with a thick coldness. The fire Qilin, who originally wanted to watch the show, tensed up and said in a steady voice, "Yes, my respected master." Baligaju strolled in. His posture was slow and elegant. As he walked, his slender fingers unbuttoned his collar. An unprecedented evil smile appeared on his face. He had waited for this day for too long. Chapter 409. Bailey Jiaju knew that he had tormented her miserably, but it was undeniable that he liked this kind of feeling. He also wanted to be gentle, but he didn't know why, but once he touched her body, the ruthlessness in his heart couldn't be concealed. He even wanted to bite her throat when she stretched her neck. He wanted to taste her blood and see if her blood was sweet as well. He couldn't do this. Baligaju clenched his hands. He had to control himself. She wouldn't like to see him lose his mind and only know how to kill. Baligaju took a deep breath. The demonic red light in his eyes gradually faded away. He reached out and stroked Helene Vivian's hair, leaving a gentle kiss on her forehead. Then he smiled evilly. Even if he didn't like her, he would keep her by his side. Whoosh! The night wind blew through the treetops. The azure dragon, who was sleeping at the bottom of the lake, seemed to have sensed something. It suddenly flipped and the entire lake became uncontrollable. The man in white took 2 heavy steps back. Blood seeped out from his thin lips. The little one with the gourd on his back gritted his teeth and called out anxiously, "Master." "I'm fine." The man in white brushed his finger across the corner of his mouth. His eyes darkened. The little one frowned. "What's wrong with the azure dragon? It was fine before. Is it not used to being tamed?" The man in white didn't say anything, but his dark and narrow eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of unfathomable fog. The azure dragon was still flipping in the lake. Its eyes were red and it seemed to be in a daze. Master. It seemed to have smelled its master's scent. "Master, is that you?" The azure dragon sent out its consciousness, but what answered it was dead silence. The silence didn't fade away for a long time. That's right, how could it be its master? If it really was its master, it would be impossible for it not to receive its consciousness. It didn't have any more hope. The azure dragon lowered its eyes and sank to the bottom of the lake. The next day when Hellion Wei Wei woke up, she only felt that her 2 legs did not feel like her own. When her feet stepped on the floor, they felt a little weak. However, her body seemed to have recovered a lot and her whole body felt warm and comfortable. Yuan Ming urged her in the Xuanhuan space. Woman, try your martial qi now and see if you can use your qi. Hellion Vivian nodded. She raised one hand and felt the airflow coming from her dantian. With a force, the teacup on the table was smashed into pieces. In the past she could only manipulate feng shui, but now her martial qi could materialize like other people. Your man is indeed the most nourishing medicine for devil cultivators. Yuan Ming's voice was filled with excitement. According to this development, if you do it 2 more times, I will be able to completely recover. That third prince is simply inhuman. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. Don't say such things in front of him. His Highness shouldn't want to be treated as his personal medicine gathering furnace. As a domineering CEO, what she should do now was to find a way to chase after His Highness. Even though he was now her husband in name, she still couldn't help it. But that face of his was a bit too good at attracting bees and butterflies. In addition, it was obvious that His Highness was not enlightened when it came to relationships. While he was even slower than her. So if she wanted to chase after someone, she had to do it quickly. Hellion Vivian thought about the conversation with His Highness yesterday. He didn't seem to care much about whether or not she was the one who was possessed. Thinking about it carefully, his reaction at that time seemed to indicate that he already knew something. Hellion Vivian smiled. That's right, if he wanted to investigate her, how could she hide it from him? It was more practical to chase after someone seriously. Hellion Vivian thought of this and ordered someone to call Shao Qi over. Do you know what your third brother likes to do the most? Hellion Vivian asked as she opened a book. Shao Qi held the meat bun bribed by his third sister-in-law and took a bite. He glanced at the book and almost doubted if he had read it wrong. What the hell was that? 108 moves to chase after his wife? Third sister-in-law, don't read strange books. It's not good. Shao Qi looked fierce. Hellion Vivian tapped her fingers on the table. Answer my question first. Oh. Shao Qi raised his head and thought for a while. Third brother's favorite thing to do is to sleep. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. Except for this. Killing people. Shao Qi said excitedly. Third brother even smiles when he kills people. Hellion Vivian. Can't there be a more normal answer? Forget it, I'll just follow the routine. Hellion Vivian put the book in her hand into her clothes and smiled handsomely. First of all, flowers are essential. So, that day Hellion Vivian held a bunch of roses and gave them to Beligaju in front of everyone. The smile on her face couldn't be more charming. However, His Highness, who was dealing with the memorials, only raised his eyes to look at her. Then he pulled her hand over and wiped it with a handkerchief. His voice was calm. In the future, don't hold these messy things. It's dirty. Hellion Vivian. Dirty? He actually thought the roses were dirty? She really couldn't look at His Highness with normal eyes. But she wouldn't give up. The unexpected difficulty of the royal family completely ignited Hellion Vivian's fighting spirit. After retreating, she was ready to make a comeback. To be honest, Nangong Lai was a little dumbfounded when he saw this. He thought that he was a man who had never been touched by a woman before. However, he had never seen a woman like Hellion Vivian who gave flowers to a man. And it was roses. Nangong Lai looked at the fiery red flowers and reached out to touch them. However, he was nailed to the ground by Beligaju's gaze. That gaze was extremely cold. Who allowed you to touch my things? Bailey Jiaju strolled over and held the bunch of roses in his arms. His long and narrow eyes flashed with a trace of a gentle smiling expression. Nangong Lai, who was under the influence of the forbidden technique, couldn't move. He could only shout behind him, Tiski, you still pretend to be disgusted. In fact, you're so happy in your heart. So what if I am? Beligaju played with the bright petals with his fingers. There was a hint of evil in his eyes. If you're so capable, ask Qingzhan to give you a bunch of roses too. Nangong Lai was choked by his words and completely froze. After a while he asked again, Ju, since you like it, why don't you tell her? I want to see what else she will give me next. Beligaju put the roses to the tip of his nose and sniffed. His smiling face was so handsome that it was almost intoxicating. Nangong Lai's mouth twitched. What kind of bad taste is this? Shameless, too shameless. Chapter 4:10. Beligaju, on the other hand, was very happy. She didn't know how long it took. Only then did he pick her up and put her in his arms. He slowly stroked her back so gentle that it was somewhat unbelievable. Hellion Weiwei was originally very lazy. It's just that she didn't know why, when he was clearly chasing after his wife, her entire body would become soft in the end. However, the side of his face wasn't affected in the slightest as he leisurely tidied up his sleeves. There wasn't a single wrinkle on his body. Hellion Vivian felt that she had a bit of a bad start the whole day. However, the whole school was talking about her actions of sending flowers to the shop. He-Eyes couldn't help but ask her out to talk. What exactly are you thinking? What do you mean, what am I thinking? Hellion Vivian yawned. He-Eyes raised his eyebrows. The things you did. Didn't you say you didn't like the palace and wanted to leave? That. Hellion Vivian retracted her slender fingers and smiled. I thought about it later. Even if I don't like it, I don't have to leave. I can also try to change my environment. He-Eyes. When you make this kind of decision, can you not be so hasty? All right. Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up. The people who are participating in the consort selection this time, you should investigate their backgrounds. What do you want to do? He-Eyes raised his eyebrows vigilantly. Hellion Vivian shrugged and smiled faintly. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will win 100 battles. You're saying you're also participating in the selection? He-Eyes looked at her face and really couldn't bear to think about the results of the selection. He only said implicitly, I don't know about those people's backgrounds, but they're quite fair. He meant that you're so dark, why are you joining in the fun? You'll be defeated in minutes. However, Hellion Vivian really just raised her eyebrows and said, oh, meaningfully. What He-Eyes wanted to know wasn't this, so he paused and said, what does this have to do with you sending the royal roses? Can't you see? Hellion Vivian was also confused. I'm chasing him. He-Eyes' face was full of shock. After being in the capital for so long, this was the first time he had seen a girl chase someone so swiftly and decisively. It's fine if you're chasing someone, but why are you giving her flowers? Hellion Vivian smiled mysteriously. You don't understand. He-Eyes. He really didn't understand. Was there a need for a girl to send flowers when she was chasing someone? Shouldn't it be the other way around? A boy giving a girl a present? I've read a lot of books in the past. My experience in chasing people is also from those books because it's very easy to find a way to match my identity. Hellion Vivian didn't find any problems at all. She rationally shared her thoughts with He-Eyes. For example, the arms tycoon fell in love with me. He-Eyes shamelessly asked, the munitions tycoon fell in love with me? What was that? Hellion Weiwei spent 20 minutes to roughly explain the entire book to Heizei. He-Eyes finally understood, but the corner of his mouth twitched. So, your position is that of a munitions tycoon? Of course. Hellion Vivian lifted her chin slightly. She wasn't just a munitions tycoon, she was also a domineering CEO. I've analyzed it. The way to do it is basically to either domineeringly possess the other party at first or say I only love you in the whole world. Send flowers first, then cook and finally settle everything with a kiss. As long as the movement is big enough and the scene is eye-catching enough, it's very easy to chase the other party. He-Eyes' expression was slightly conflicted. Domineeringly possess the other party? That doesn't fit my style. Hellion Vivian was a little shy when she said this. I like to do it step by step. He-Eyes, who asked you this? How do you think a girl like you can domineeringly possess the royal family? Tell me. So I learned a little more. Hellion Vivian was serious in her work. Of course, she wouldn't only make one preparation when it came to chasing someone. I also read this book. As she spoke, she took out the book that she had hidden and handed it to He-Eyes. When I saw it, I was really happy. Because it was the one that gave me the inspiration for the specific way to chase someone. He-Eyes looked at the book cover. The words 108 Ways to Chase Your Wife were written in black and white. Chase your wife. Wife. This is the inspiration it gave you, how to go on the path of courting death, right? You'd better not let the royal family see this book. He-Eyes chuckled twice. Hellion Vivian sighed deeply. Unfortunately, he already knows. He actually didn't strangle you to death. Actually, I feel that what I did wasn't eye-catching enough. Hellion Vivian continued. He already didn't know what expression to use to face her. He wailed in his heart. Trust me, you're eye-catching enough. Right now, the entire academy is talking about you sending flowers to His Highness. Even the teacher in class fainted because of you. What else do you want? I thought of a good idea. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and suddenly smiled evilly. I need your cooperation. He covered his face. I don't want to be beaten to death by the royal family. Last time he even threatened me that if I saw you again he would directly bestow a marriage upon me. Don't worry. This time we're doing something big and grand. He won't care. Hellion Vivian raised the corners of her eyes with a unique laziness and slyness. He was about to cry. What kind of sister did he actually acknowledge? It was night. The sky gradually turned dark. In the midst of the clouds, a man in white stood under a vine and coughed heavily twice. Master, are you all right? The little one carried a gourd and tugged at the man's clothes. Her face was full of worry. Master, what's wrong? The man in white smiled faintly. Nothing. Are you unhappy because she sent flowers to someone else today? The little one bit her lips. Master, why don't you tell her that you've been looking for her for so long? For her, you even went to the underworld. You even made your body become like this, but she doesn't know anything. The man in white reached out and stroked the little one's head. I'll tell her. I'll tell her when she really wakes up. But the previous array has been broken. We have to set up a new one. The little one's eyes darkened. The night wind swept across the green dragon lake, stirring up another layer of ripples. The man in white grunted. His voice was a little cold and he was a little absent-minded. The little one knew that he still hadn't forgotten what he saw today. She lowered her little hand and obediently followed him into the bustling commercial compound. Chapter 4:11. The next day. In the imperial court, the civil and military officials were a little nervous compared to usual. It was not because of anything else, but because the royal family who had never appeared in the morning court actually came. He did not stand but leaned lazily on the carved wooden chair at the side. He raised his eyebrows and looked at them. All of you want me to take in a secondary consort? The old officials who were kneeling down had their own plans. Now that Emperor Murong had fallen, it meant that the fifth prince had lost his power. If they could use the opportunity of the third prince's secondary consort selection to send their daughters into the palace, they could regain their footing and show the third prince that they were on his side. However, these officials did not think that Beligaju was not willing to take in this secondary consort at all. Lord Zhang. Beligaju slowly called out a name. When I was eradicating Murong Yu's party some time ago, someone seemed to know Lord Zhang. Lord Zhang, shouldn't you explain how the two of you met and then mention the secondary consort selection? Lord Zhang shuddered and knelt on the ground with a thud. He shouted with a pale face, Your Highness, please spare my life. Your Majesty, please spare my life. Beligaju did not even look at him. Not to mention the emperor who ignored the imperial court all day long. In the purple golden imperial palace no one dared to speak. However, even if Beligaju was unwilling, he had reached the age limit. As long as he was the crown prince, once he reached the age limit, he would have to choose a capable woman to accompany him. The previous emperors did not have a situation like Beligaju's because when they chose their consort, they would choose the most outstanding woman. However, Beligaju chose a faceless woman who could not even light up a crystal ball. This was not acceptable at all. Moreover, there were outstanding women like Yun Biluo and Hellion Jiaoer in the capital city. This would cause a lot of dissatisfaction among the people. Even though this Hellion Wei isn't as useless as before, but that face of hers is really very unsightly. How could third prince tolerate her? I reckon it's because she's from the Hellion bloodline. Don't forget how many heroic contributions old Master Hellion made back then. Forget it. She's already been chased out of the general's residence. It's hard to say if she can recognize a new ancestor. I heard that the second miss of the Hellion family stayed in the temple for 2 days. Because she felt guilty, she recited some Buddhist scriptures. How should I put it? I think she's quite pitiful. It's Madame Su who did something wrong, not her. Sacrificing herself to save her daughter's reputation was a ruthless move by Su Yenmo. In the past few days after returning to the capital, as long as she went out, she would be pointed at and talked about. She hated Hellion Vivian from the bottom of her heart. She hated her so much that the roots of her teeth were itching. If it wasn't for that little bastard, she didn't need to suffer such humiliation. Moreover, Su Yenmo clearly knew that before the secondary consort selection, reputation was very important to the selected ladies. That was why she did what she did. For so many days, the Su family had started to restrain her because she had used too much previously. Murong Guangyao was nowhere to be seen all day long. She knew that he felt that she had embarrassed him by parading around, so he didn't even want to be close to her. Su Yenmo was the only one who knew how tough her life had been recently. However, it was worth being happy that before the appearance evaluation, Jiao Er's reputation had finally improved. Jiao Er. Su Yenmo stood beside the sedan chair and waved at the Hellion Jiao Er. She took the white handkerchief in her hand and wanted to wipe the sweat on her forehead. The Hellion Jiao Er turned her head and hurriedly glanced at the few ladies who were walking with her just now. She then pulled Su Yenmo aside and asked, "Mother, why are you here? I saw that you didn't go home, so I was worried about you." Su Yenmo was stunned for a moment before she replied, "What's wrong?" The Hellion Jiao Er looked up and twisted the white handkerchief with her fingers. "They were just fooling around with me like they used to when you appeared. Mother, you should go home first. It's very difficult for me to stand here." Su Yenmo glanced at the few silhouettes standing behind her. They were all wealthy people in the circle. She smiled and said, "Mother understands. Mother will go back now. Have fun, have fun." The crowd watched as Su Yenmo left and then came closer. "Jiao Er, that was your mother. She looked like a very kind person. Why did she?" The Hellion Jiao Er heard and her eyes immediately turned red. "No matter what she did wrong, she was still my mother. She didn't have any bad intentions at that time. Forget it, forget it. It's all in the past." One after another, the young ladies of each family gathered around and comforted Hellion Jiao Er. "With a face like yours, it's hard to avoid attracting jealousy. Some older sisters perhaps they just can't bear to see their younger sister doing well. That's why they created so many problems." The more the Hellion Jiao Er listened, the more pitiful she pretended to be. "I don't blame my sister. If it were me, I would be very angry too. It's just that my sister seemed unwilling to forgive me and my mother this time. No matter how much we said, it didn't help. I've always wanted to apologize to her sincerely. Jiao Er, not everyone is as kind as you. Think about it carefully. The consort selection is just around the corner. With her looks, she can't bear to see anyone prettier than her. That's why she refused to forgive you. She wanted to affect your reputation so that you can't participate in the selection." That person curled her lips and looked disdainful. Someone echoed, "That's right. I also think that the third princess consort is simply jealous. She can't grow up, so she's harming others. She won't even let go of someone as beautiful as Sister Yun. She's simply vicious. Let's not talk about her. It's getting late. Let's hurry and participate in the appearance evaluation. It'll be too late if we're late." The Hellion Jiao Er nodded. Her actions were natural and unrestrained. The first step of the secondary consort selection was the appearance evaluation. This evaluation was completely confidential. Everyone's name was hidden and only their serial number and name were left. This was to ensure that the evaluation results were absolutely fair. The Hellion Jiao Er looked at the score written on the rice paper after the evaluation of her face. Her thin lips curled into a smile, and there was a deep sense of satisfaction hidden in her eyes. "Hellion Vivian, so what if you're powerful? You can only watch as the royal family chooses a secondary consort. Heh. Who asked you to have such a dark and ugly face? Not to mention the end of the selection, you can't even pass the first round of the appearance evaluation." The Hellion Jiao Er laughed. Just as she was about to tidy up her hair and walk out, she saw the door of another room being slowly pushed open. A pair of slender white legs appeared in front of the Hellion Jiao Er. Chapter 412. The Hellion Jiao Er could clearly hear the gasps coming from all around. Looking at the woman walking towards her, she subconsciously clenched her fists. How could it be her? That village girl from the red light district. Perhaps it was because the noise was too loud, the people around them also looked in their direction. In the afterglow of the setting sun, a woman in a bright red robe was holding an umbrella inlaid with black feathers. Only her face was exposed. She had a pair of languid eyes and her skin was as white as snow. Her long, curly chestnut-colored hair was no longer bound by a wooden hairpin and was casually draped behind her back, giving people the illusion that she was extremely clean. The people standing beside the Hellion Jower were already a bit dumbfounded and asked blankly, "Who is this?" "How would I know?" The Hellion Jower bit her lip and clenched her fists even tighter. She didn't expect that person to be qualified to participate in the appearance evaluation. The people nearby glanced at the Hellion Jower and said, "Jiao Air, your tone is very strange." "Sorry." The Hellion Jower rubbed her head and said, "I'm probably a bit tired. My body hasn't been very good recently." That person nodded in understanding, but his eyes did not leave the woman who was walking away. "Beautiful, really beautiful. That skin is so white that it's almost transparent. She looks just like a fairy." Yes. The Hellion Jower did not mean what she said. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the more she looked at that village girl, the more familiar she felt. It was not the kind of familiarity that she had seen once or twice, but the familiarity that came from being by her side all year round. Forget it, this was not the main point. The main point was how to find a way to get rid of this woman who came from the red light district. Just as Hellion Jiao Air was lost in her thoughts, someone on the other side shouted in surprise, "The results of the facial appraisal are out. Everyone quickly go and take a look to find your own ranking." The ladies were very excited, but they more or less knew where they would be ranked. Someone said, "Jiao Air is here, so we definitely don't expect to get first place." "Sister, you're making fun of me again." Hellion Jower seemed to be shy and blushed. "There's also Sister Yun. Sister Yun came here this morning for a test, but I don't know what her serial number is." Alright, I'll stop messing with you. But you and Jadefall are the only two who look outstanding in the capital. Either way, the first place will be between the two of you." That person pulled Hellion Jower and wanted to go over. Hellion Jower also had a sweet smile on her face. For the time being, she put the matter of seeing that village girl to the back of her mind. However, when she saw the serial number on the list, the smile on her face froze. She wasn't the only one. Even the person who had just pulled her over glanced at the number in her hand in disbelief and compared it to the announcement list on the wall. How could this be? Jiao Air is only third. That's strange, who's the second place? The crowd habitually ignored the serial number of the first place because they had already determined that the first place was Yun Biluo. They began to anxiously look for the corresponding serial number of the second person. "Number 5? Who's number 5? No one answered. The ladies frowned one after another. They were very puzzled by the sudden appearance of the second place. Someone whispered, "Why don't you ask who's number 11? What's there to ask? It's definitely Sister Yun. I'll look for her when I return to the academy and tell her this good news." Hellion Jower could no longer hear what the people around her were saying. All her attention was on the announcement list, as if she had fallen into a pool of ice water. Third place? How could she only be third place? Could it be because of that village girl who had just walked out? Hellion Jower gripped the handkerchief in her hand tightly. She didn't want to be so ruthless. She was the dignified daughter of the general's residence. Why should she be oppressed by a bitch who came out of nowhere? Just wait and see. She must find out who this person is and then ruthlessly slash her face. Hellion Jiao Air's heart was filled with sinister thoughts. She turned her body sideways and instructed the mammy that Madame Su had found for her. She wanted the mammy to privately find the person in charge of this appearance appraisal. She wanted to first revoke the qualifications of that village girl before anything else. However, this time it was not as easy as Hellion Jower thought. The nanny returned and shook her head at her. Hellion Jower did not expect that there would be a day when her identity would not work. Even money was not useful? What's going on? The nanny looked around and said, "The person in charge did not even accept the money." He looked very scared and his face was pale. Hellion Jower snorted coldly. "It's probably a new person who has not done this before. I'll talk to him directly later." "Yes." The nanny bowed her head respectfully. It was easy for Hellion Jiao Air to find Lord Liao, who was in charge of the overall appearance appraisal. When Lord Liao saw Hellion Jiao Air, his eyes were fixed on her and the light in his eyes circled her body. Helian Jiaoer usually did not want to interact with official Liao. He was obviously the same age as her father, but every time he saw her, he would always look at her with that very uncomfortable gaze. Jiaoer, come here. Tell Uncle Liao what's going on. Official Liao reached out and pulled Helian Jiaoer over, letting her sit on the wooden chair next to him. If it was before, Helian Jiaoer would definitely ignore him. But now Helian Jiaoer also knew the current situation of the general's residence. If she wanted to succeed, she naturally had to learn to soften her attitude. Uncle Liao, I want you to do something for me. Helian Jiaoer softened her voice, a bit like she was acting coquettishly. When the man with the surname Liao heard this, his whole body went limp. He took the opportunity to pour water for Helian Jiaoer and placed his hand on the little hand that he had been yearning for day and night. What is it? Not to mention one thing, Uncle will do 10 things for you. Helian Jiaoer was not a young girl who did not know anything. In the past, in order to drive a wedge between Helian Vivian and Murong Chongfeng, she deliberately learned those things between men and women. She had a dream that night as if she had secretly eaten the forbidden fruit. Now that official Liao touched her hand like this, she did not know why her whole body felt a little hot. When official Liao saw that she did not refuse, he became bolder and put his hand on her thigh. He breathed out a thick breath and approached her. Our Jiaoer is really becoming more and more beautiful. The more you grow, the more seductive you are. Your skin is also so good. Helian Jiaoer did not push him away. Instead, she softly said, "En." When official Liao saw this, his eyes lit up. He directly hugged her and kissed her lips. His voice was rough. Chapter 413. Helian Jiaoer wouldn't really do anything to him. She just wanted to let him have a taste of the sweetness and whispered in his ear. Lord Liao quickly agreed. Don't worry, the person you mentioned, I will definitely not let her be selected. Good. Helian Jiaoer pushed his shoulder and said softly, I will thank Uncle Liao when the time comes. How could Lord Liao be willing to let her go? He hugged her from behind and caressed her with his big hands. Stay a little longer. Uncle Liao will personally send you back later. Helian Jiaoer's legs were soft after being caressed. She pushed and the two of them returned to the wooden chair. Although the servants outside couldn't hear clearly what the people inside said, they could still hear the ambiguous sounds. The guards looked at each other and sneered in their hearts. They really didn't expect these ladies to be like this in private. Lord Liao's child was already so old, not to mention that there was a tigress in his family. As Helian Weiwei listened to the mercenary's report, the corners of her mouth curled into a sinister smile and said, Continue to follow her, then send this invitation to the Liao residence. Tell Madame Liao that I will give her a big gift on the day of the selection tomorrow. Yes. The mercenary looked at Helian Vivian and was somewhat stunned. If he didn't see it with his own eyes, he would never associate this fairy-like person in front of him with his own young master. Helian Weiwei, on the other hand, didn't feel anything. Holding the umbrella in her hand, her thin lips curled into a smile, faintly raised. White Academy. Beligaju, who had just returned after the morning court, untied his cloak with his slender fingers and said, Go and wake the princess up. In his impression, Helian Weiwei's ability to laze around in bed was to the extent that it could infuriate both men and gods. Without anyone calling her, she could lie on the desk in the inner hall for an entire day, not to mention that she was given a bed to sleep on. Qing Zhan said uncomfortably, Your Highness, the princess, you are looking for me? The unique freshness in the woman's voice was particularly pleasant to the ears in this morning, but it made the listeners feel particularly puzzled. Beligaju looked at the woman in a loose robe who had put away her umbrella. His eyes narrowed as he beckoned with his slender fingers. Come here. Helian Vivian was currently at the most important stage of getting a wife. Those overbearing CEOs would show up in front of their wives from time to time when they were trying to get a wife. Helian Vivian also wanted this effect. She walked towards Beligaju with a smile. Beligaju lowered his eyes and looked at her for a long time. His fingers traced the traces on her face. Where did you go? In fact, he wanted to ask, why did she get up so early today? Oh, I went out to do something. Helian Vivian said casually with a smile in the corner of her eyes. What's more, the morning is the best time of the day. Of course, we can't waste such a good time. Qing Zhan was listening at the side. Her expression was a little conflicted. Because everyone knew that the princess was a person who didn't care about her life when she slept. Now she said something like, "The morning is the best time of the day." Sure enough, since the day the princess came back with a book, 108 Ways to Get a Wife, she had never been normal. There was no expression on Bailey Jiaju's face, but his pair of eyes deepened. He looked at Helian Weiwei with a gaze full of deep meaning. "Follow me back to the palace in a moment." "Okay." Helian Weiwei's yawning hand paused. That face had long returned to its usual dark and gloomy state, faintly carrying a smiling expression. Those people in the palace probably still don't know that I'm pursuing a certain highness. I'll give them a heads up first." However, in fact, there was no heads up that Helian Vivian needed to do. Since Baligaju cleared out all the shadow guards last time, he didn't even see a palace maid when he returned to the palace this time, let alone a female death attendant. Therefore the people who served Helian Weiwei were all old mamas. When they were treating the new princess consort, they were all respectful and reverent without the slightest mistake. All of a sudden Helian Weiwei felt that her thoughts were of no use. She sat at the dining table and sighed slightly. Why did she always feel that the domineering that she prepared was useless when it came to a certain someone? What happened to a lot of maids in the bedroom? There was none. How could she find an excuse to cabotin someone? How could she show her evil charm without cabotin? Sigh. Baligaju saw that from the moment she entered the bedroom, she began to look for something with an evil smile. In the end she looked a little listless. He directly picked up a piece of vegetable and said in a faint voice as if he was raising prey, "Don't be in a daze when you eat." Helian Vivian opened her mouth and took a bite. She ate elegantly. While she was being fed she muttered in her heart. He kept feeling that something was not right. Those girls in the books shouldn't behave like this, right? They even care about what the president eats? It didn't seem like it. However, His Highness was different. He liked to feed her and he would also set who she met. Forget it, who asked her to be a domineering president now. It was only right for her to be considerate of her other half. Helian Vivian ate until her cheeks were slightly puffed. Sigh, His Highness was really a tormenting little demon. Then she put all her energy into the food. Nangong Lai was stunned by the interaction between the two. After a while he found his voice. "Aju, even if you're being polite, you should let me win. I haven't eaten lunch yet." The royal, who was interrupted by the feeding, said in a cold voice, "Why are you here?" "I've always been here." Nangong Lai's voice rose. "It's because the two of you went back and forth too frequently. You didn't even look to the side. Also, does Helian Vivian not have hands? Does she need you to feed her?" Helian Vivian certainly noticed Nangong Lai's gaze, especially this one. She didn't have any other thoughts when it came to this playboy. If she could beat him up, she would beat him up. Thus, in the next second, Nangong Lai felt dizzy and lay on the ground. What just happened? Helian Vivian nimbly retracted her left leg that only used a little bit of strength. Her thin lips curved. Wei. Baligaju frowned disapprovingly. His noble and handsome face turned to the side. Nangong Lai was in tears. "Aju, you finally remembered that I'm your brother." Helian Vivian looked back and raised the corner of her eyes at him, waiting for him to continue. "In the future when you eat, don't fight and kill. It's not good for your stomach." Baligaju reached out and pulled her over. "Sit down and continue eating. You ate too little just now." Nangong Lai, who was knocked to the ground, was dumbfounded. "What the hell? Aju. I was beaten up. Didn't you see? Where exactly is your focus?" Chapter 4:14. Helian Vivian didn't want to beat him too much. Beating him a little would be enough. After listening to Baligaju's words, she sat back in her original place and continued to accept a certain highness feeding. Bailey Jiaju, on the other hand, casually placed one hand on the back of the chair behind her, while the other hand casually picked up vegetables. Although there was no particularly intimate action, one could feel the tacit understanding between the two. Nangong Lai simply couldn't believe that these two people could be so unscrupulous. Not only were they loving each other, but they were also so unbridled in front of him. Was this the rhythm of torturing a single person to death? After another half an incense's time, Baligaju finally put down the bamboo chopsticks in his hand. He took the handkerchief handed over by the eunuch and wiped his hands. He said to Helian Vivian, drink another bowl of soup in a while. It's boiled with red dates. It's good for your body. Hellion Vivian nodded obediently. If you can't finish it, just leave it. Don't stuff it. She continued to nod obediently. Seeing that she was so cooperative, Beligaju was very satisfied. He patted the furry head in front of him. If you really want to go out, let Eunuch Sun take you. If there's anything, let him inform me in time. Don't go too far. Hellion Vivian took his hand and drank a mouthful of tea. After getting a positive answer, Beligaju stood up slowly and tidied up his sleeves. He was ready to take Nangong Lai, who was already crying piteously for food, to teach those restless ministers a lesson. After taking 2 steps, he felt that it was inappropriate, so he stopped and stood up straight. If anyone provokes you, there's no need for Eunuch Sun to report. Just beat them back. Don't be bullied. Hearing this, Nangong Lai felt a lot of pressure. Miss Hellion could even beat him, the prodigy priest, without hesitation. She could kick him down with 1 foot. Who could bully her? It's good that she doesn't beat others, okay? But why does Aju's way of speaking sound so familiar? Yes, I remember. Back then he had taught little Seven the same way. That was why he had raised a little tiger that no one dared to provoke. Hellion Vivian felt that at this time, she had to fully show her thoughtfulness as an overbearing president. She smiled at Beligaju and said, "Don't worry, I won't let others bully me. If they go too far, I will definitely fight back." Nangong Lai, why did he have a feeling that the imperial palace would not be peaceful in the future? And, wait a minute, why did she not seem to care about Aju choosing a secondary consort? It was impossible for her not to know that the capital was in such a great uproar. Well, it was not like this woman to be so silent. It would be more convincing if she beat up all the beauties who came to pick the concubine. But it was so calm now. It shouldn't be like this. What do you want to say to me? Beligaju glanced at Nangong Lai, who was still in a daze in the study. Nangong Lai gently coughed. I figured it out. Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows and signaled him to continue. Actually, this kind of thing has happened before. After all, she is the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. It's not strange that she is the one who possessed the body. Nangong Lai looked at him and said, the main thing is that she said she came from 1,000 years in the future. This is a bit strange. Have you asked her what the War Dragon Empire is like 1,000 years in the future? Beligaju's voice was faint. Her world is a bit different from now. That's the key point. Nangong Lai's eyes darkened. If she was just the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, she would not have chosen the Demon Cultivator. You know, the Phoenix Girl and the Demon Cultivator are opposite. I think something must have gone wrong when she was reincarnated. That's why this happened. Speaking up to this point, he paused for a moment, then continued, but Aju, there is one thing you must pay attention to. This is something you have never taken to heart, and that is the arrival of the Phoenix Girl will bring about a huge change to you. You must properly handle the matter between the two of you, otherwise it is very likely to change the entire situation of the War Dragon Empire. Beligaju did not speak. He rubbed his chin with his fingers. No one knew what he was thinking. Nangong Lai looked at his face. In his mind, various methods used by men before began to appear. After thinking for a while, he opened his mouth and said, actually, this Hellion Vivian is pretty good. Although she was more in line with your aesthetic standards in the past, naive and pure, and was scared of you to death when she was young. You were very interested in her. But no matter what, she is now the 3rd princess consort. You better not go too far. I was interested in her when I was young? Beligaju sneered. Why didn't I know? Nangong Lai smiled evilly. Did you forget? But it's normal for you to forget. I just remembered it recently. At that time I also just met you. When you saw Hellion Vivian, your face was not very good. My face was not good because I was interested in her? Beligaju sat back and casually crossed his 2 slender legs. Nangong Lai raised his eyebrows. Is it not? If you are not interested in someone, you won't even look at her. He was a pervert since childhood. The more you like something, the more you want to bully it. As if he saw through Nangong Lai's thoughts, Beligaju absent-mindedly looked at him. Do you think I will be interested in a girl who is scared of me to the point that her face is pale? At that time I was still a child. I was not so perverted. If I don't like someone, I will usually show it. Then according to what you mean, you don't like the previous Hellion Vivian? It was the first time that Nangong Lai heard him say that he didn't like someone. Then he laughed. Are you keeping Hellion Vivian by your side now to take revenge on her for being scared of you before? No wonder you were so interested in her when you first saw her. Beligaju listened to his words and said in a faint voice, I don't have time to take revenge. He knew very well who made him want to destroy the person every time he saw her. Perhaps it was like what Lai said. The more he liked something, the more he wanted to crush it. No. He couldn't have this thought again. That woman, he wanted to let her stay by his side forever like this. Even if it was unscrupulous. Perhaps when he killed people in the future he should hide it from her. He didn't want her to know about his unknown side. That kind of cruelty, cunning, killing people like flies and even taking pleasure in destruction. If possible, he never wanted her to know. After coming out of the study, Beligaju went back. Hellion Vivian was already asleep. In order to get enough energy, she didn't go anywhere. She lay quietly on the bed. She was so well behaved that it was not like her usual self. Chapter 4:15. She was still wearing the pure black collar that he had given her. Her long chestnut hair was spread out on the bed. The side of her face was so clean that even the fine hairs on it could be seen. Beligaju looked at her peaceful sleeping face and couldn't resist bending down to kiss her lips. Eunuch Sun stayed in the palace all year round and naturally knew that the scenery on the other side of the screen wasn't something that servants like them could see. He only walked over and waited on the side. Under normal circumstances, Beligaju would know that he had something to report. Come in. An indifferent and emotionless voice came from behind the screen. When Eunuch Sun came in, Beligaju was still sitting on the bed. Seeing him come in, he didn't get up. Instead, he reached out to touch Hellion Wei's forehead. He lowered his voice and asked, What's the matter? Looking at Beligaju's hand, Eunuch Sun withdrew his gaze. He knew that His Highness didn't want to wake Wang Fei up, so he lowered his voice as much as possible and said, These are the memorials that have been submitted by the ministers in the past 2 days. The Emperor's expression has been very ugly these past 2 days. I'm afraid that he won't be able to read these memorials. The retired Emperor had this servant deliver them to Your Highness to read. Beligaju's voice was indifferent as he grunted, Put them down. You can leave. Eunuch Sun acknowledged and respectfully took the memorials from the little eunuch's hands. He placed them on the carved sandalwood table at the side. He paused and said, Your Highness, the retired Emperor wants to invite Wang Fei over for a family dinner. Should this servant prepare now or wait until Wang Fei wakes up? She's not a picky eater. Prepare the soup as usual. Beligaju pinched Hellion Vivian's fingers, looking extremely satisfied. Eunuch Sun obeyed and ordered people to prepare. When he walked out of the bedroom, he couldn't help but look back, only to see that the two figures behind the screen were so compatible that it made others envious. Beligaju was holding Hellion Vivian in his arms with extreme gentleness, and the person in his arms didn't wake up at all. Instead, she buried her head in Beligaju's neck, lazily like a sleepy cat, noble and sleepy. Eunuch Sun was stunned for a moment before he frowned. His Highness had never been so kind to anyone before. He was worried about this, and that was why he was worried. His Highness had never agreed to participate in the selection of the secondary consort. Although the ministers did not dare to provoke His Highness, there were more and more voices behind his back. Even if the retired emperor didn't want to break up the couple, he would talk to the princess about the selection of the secondary consort. He really didn't know what His Highness would do at that time. Thinking of this, Eunuch Sun shook his head, raised his eyes and glanced at the screen. Hellion Vivian was in a daze. She put her head on Beligaju's shoulder and moved back and forth as if she wanted to get up. She said sleepily, Well, what time is it? It's still early. Sleep a little more. As Beligaju said, he freed one hand and gently put it on Hellion Vivian's forehead. Only then did Hellion Wei feel comfortable. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Beligaju held her with one hand and patted her back with his fingers. His other hand picked up the memorial that had just been presented. His side profile, which was always indifferent and cold, looked more gentle at this time. Seeing this scene, Eunuch Sun didn't say anything. He walked out of the bedroom with the eunuchs serving on both sides. The Highness he knew was ruthless and thoughtful. He had always been domineering and liked to kill people without leaving a trace of blood. It was this kind of person who seemed to have given away all the patience he had in his life just now. Eunuch Sun was undoubtedly happy. since he was a child. The highness he saw was a slightly gloomy person. It was a little strange to describe a little boy with the word gloomy. But Eunuch's son had never forgotten the scene when he saw Beligaju for the first time. At that time his highness was still young. He looked noble and delicate. When people saw him they couldn't help but wonder how there could be such a beautiful child in the world. However, such a child could stand in the imperial garden and watch the two palace maids being drowned in the lake. He was calm and even had a slightly evil smile. At that time, Eunuch's son was afraid of this little master. After so many years, Eunuch's son finally knew why he became like that. An unfavored prince and bearing the name of the nemesis never lived a good life in the palace. Now everyone was fighting to be his highness's concubine. A long time ago, every time those daughters of officials came to the palace, they would hide far away from his highness. Some of the sons of officials close to the empress would even talk about him behind his back. Invisible isolation was the most terrible thing. So his highness didn't talk much. Because he didn't have any friends. Even his biological mother didn't like him very much. Every night he would pick up a bowl and eat by himself. However, he gradually became more and more ruthless. Perhaps the former empress was right. Beligaju was a person with ruthlessness in his bones. The retired emperor had felt guilty for so many years because he owed his highness. But he was most afraid that his highness would really fall into the devil's path one day. Now with the princess by his highness's side, he obviously felt that the cold martial chi had softened. But how to solve the problem of selecting the secondary concubine was really a problem. As the retired emperor's right-hand man, Eunuch's son had to tell Hellion Vivian something before the banquet, so that it would be easier to talk about it during the meal. Hellion Vivian got hungry easily. Before Beligaju went to the study to deal with official business, he had the habit of asking people to prepare pastries in the bedroom. After Hellion Wei woke up, the first thing she saw was a plate of colorful pastries, then a cup of Longjing tea that left a lingering fragrance on her lips and teeth. Only then did she tilt her head to listen to Eunuch's son's earnest and well-meaning advice. At first she was a little interested. Later she picked up a piece of peach pastry and stuffed it in Eunuch's son's mouth. She smiled faintly. The selection of the secondary concubine will start tomorrow. Why are you panicking, Eunuch's son? He panicked. He was completely anxious for her. Eunuch's son scolded the maid in his heart. He looked at Hellion Vivian with some shock in his eyes. Why was the princess so relaxed? The selection of the secondary concubine is going to start soon. After Eunuch's son swallowed the peach pastry in his mouth, he said, "The results of the appearance evaluation are out. I heard that the first place is Miss Yun, who was recommended by the 4 great families. The retired emperor doesn't like this girl, but he can't say anything now. I'm so worried." Compared to Eunuch's son's gloomy face, Hellion Wei was obviously much calmer. However, she still raised her eyebrows playfully and asked, "You said that Yun Biluo got first place in the appearance evaluation?" Chapter 416. She was still wearing the pure black collar that he had given her. Her long chestnut hair was spread out on the bed. The side of her face was so clean that even the fine hairs on it could be seen. Beligaju looked at her peaceful sleeping face and couldn't resist bending down to kiss her lips. Eunuch's son stayed in the palace all year round and naturally knew that the scenery on the other side of the screen wasn't something that servants like them could see. He only walked over and waited on the side. Under normal circumstances, Beligaju would know that he had something to report. "Come in." An indifferent and emotionless voice came from behind the screen. When Eunuch's son came in, Beligaju was still sitting on the bed. Seeing him come in, he didn't get up. Instead, he reached out to touch Hellion Wei's forehead. He lowered his voice and asked, "What's the matter?" Looking at Beligaju's hand, Eunuch's son withdrew his gaze. He knew that his highness didn't want to wake Wang Fei up, so he lowered his voice as much as possible and said, "These are the memorials that have been submitted by the ministers in the past 2 days. The emperor's expression has been very ugly these past 2 days. I'm afraid that he won't be able to read these memorials. The retired emperor had this servant deliver them to your highness to read." Beligaju's voice was indifferent as he grunted, "Put them down. You can leave." Eunuch's son acknowledged and respectfully took the memorials from the little eunuch's hands. He placed them on the carved sandalwood table at the side. He paused and said, "Your highness, the retired emperor wants to invite Wang Fei over for a family dinner. Should this servant prepare now or wait until Wang Fei wakes up? She's not a picky eater. Prepare the soup as usual. Beligaju pinched Hellion Vivian's fingers, looking extremely satisfied. Eunuch Sun obeyed and ordered people to prepare. When he walked out of the bedroom he couldn't help but look back, only to see that the two figures behind the screen were so compatible that it made others envious. Beligaju was holding Hellion Vivian in his arms with extreme gentleness, and the person in his arms didn't wake up at all. Instead she buried her head in Beligaju's neck, lazily like a sleepy cat, noble and sleepy. Eunuch Sun was stunned for a moment before he frowned. His Highness had never been so kind to anyone before. He was worried about this, and that was why he was worried. His Highness had never agreed to participate in the selection of the secondary consort. Although the ministers did not dare to provoke His Highness, there were more and more voices behind his back. Even if the retired emperor didn't want to break up the couple, he would talk to the princess about the selection of the secondary consort. He really didn't know what His Highness would do at that time. Thinking of this, Eunuch Sun shook his head, looked up at the screen again and glanced at it. Hellion Vivian was in a daze. She put her head on Beligaju's shoulder and moved back and forth as if she wanted to get up. She said in a daze, "Well, what time is it?" "It's still early. Sleep a little more." As Beligaju said, he freed one hand and gently put it on Hellion Vivian's forehead. Only then did Hellion Wei feel comfortable. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Beligaju held her with one hand and patted her back with his fingers. The other hand picked up the memorial that had just been presented. His side profile, which had always been indifferent, looked more gentle at this time. Seeing this scene, Eunuch Sun didn't say anything. He walked out of the bedroom with the eunuchs serving on both sides. The prince he knew was ruthless and thoughtful. He had always been able to do whatever he wanted and liked to kill people without leaving a trace of blood. It was this kind of person who seemed to have given away all the patience he had in his life just now. Eunuch Sun was undoubtedly happy. Because since he was a child, the royal highness he saw was a slightly gloomy person. It was a little strange to use the word gloomy to describe a little boy. But Eunuch Sun had never forgotten the scene when he saw Beligaju for the first time. At that time His Highness was still young. He looked noble and delicate. When people saw him they couldn't help but wonder how there could be such a beautiful child in the world. However, such a child could stand in the imperial garden and watch the two palace maids being drowned in the lake. He was calm and even had a slightly evil smile. At that time, Eunuch Sun was afraid of this little master. After so many years, Eunuch Sun finally knew why he became like that. An unfavored prince and bearing the name of the nemesis never lived a good life in the palace. Now everyone was fighting to be His Highness's concubine. A long time ago, every time those daughters of officials came to the palace, they would hide far away from His Highness. Some sons of officials who were close to the Empress would even talk about him behind his back. Invisible isolation was the most terrible thing. So His Highness didn't talk much. Because he didn't have any friends. Even his biological mother didn't like him very much. Every night he would take a bowl and eat by himself. However, he gradually became more and more ruthless. Perhaps the former empress was right. Beligaju was a person with ruthlessness in his bones. The retired emperor had felt guilty for so many years because he owed His Highness. But he was most afraid that His Highness would really fall into the devil's path one day. Now with the princess by His Highness's side, he obviously felt that the cold martial chi had softened. But how to solve the problem of selecting the secondary concubine was really a problem. As the retired emperor's right-hand man, Eunuch Sun had to tell Hellion Vivian something before the banquet so that they could talk about it during the meal. Hellion Vivian got hungry easily. Before Beligaju went to the study to deal with business, he had the habit of asking people to prepare pastries in the bedroom. After Hellion Wei woke up, the first thing she saw was a plate of colorful pastries, then a cup of Longjing tea that left a lingering fragrance on her lips and teeth. Only then did she tilt her head to listen to Eunuch Sun's earnest and well-meaning advice. At first she was a little interested. Later she picked up a piece of peach pastry and stuffed it in Eunuch Sun's mouth. Then she smiled faintly. "The selection of the secondary concubine will start tomorrow." "Why are you panicking, Eunuch Sun?" He panicked. He was completely anxious for her. Eunuch Sun scolded the maid in his heart. He looked at Hellion Vivian with some shock in his eyes. Why was the princess so relaxed? The selection of the secondary concubine is going to start soon. Eunuch Sun swallowed the peach pastry in his mouth and said, "The results of the appearance appraisal are out. I heard that the first one is Miss Yun, who was recommended by the 4 great families. The retired emperor doesn't like this girl, but he can't say anything now. I'm so worried." Compared to Eunuch Sun's frown, Hellion Wei Wei was obviously much calmer. However, she still raised her eyebrows playfully. "You said that Yun Bilua was the one who got first place in the appearance evaluation." Chapter 417. If it wasn't her, who else could it be? Eunuch Sun sighed again. His face was very worried. Hellion Vivian held the osmanthus cake in her mouth. She used her left hand to point at the bridge of her nose with her slender index finger. Meaning. This time Hellion Wei Wei made Eunuch Sun laugh. He coughed heavily and said, "Princess Consort, you're making fun of me again." Hellion Wei Wei saw that he did not believe her, so she did not say much. She just curled her lips and smiled. Then she sat cross-legged on the cage bed that was made with expensive gold. She held a box of desserts in her arms and slowly ate the desserts one by one. When she tasted the apricot cake, she felt that it tasted good, so she kept a few more for Bailey Jiaju, thinking that he could eat some if he was hungry later. Eunuch Sun couldn't understand what she was thinking. In the long years that followed, he had been silently worried about Hellion Vivian's future. First of all, she was a young lady with no power. His Highness no longer liked her. She was very likely to die in this palace. He had been so worried. Until not long after she regained the Hellion clan. Baligaju used the blood of countless people to remove all the obstacles between the two of them. At that time, Eunuch Sun understood that every step along the way Baligaju was paving the way for Hellion Vivian. So that even if she stood on a high place and waved her sword to her heart's content, she didn't have to worry about falling. Because he always stood in a position where she could take a step back, using the most ruthless method to get rid of all her worries in an unknown corner. Hellion Vivian saw that Eunuch Sun was still in a daze. After eating the snacks, she began to fiddle with the armament parts. She liked these things. In modern times, she would feel uncomfortable sleeping if she didn't put a few submachine guns under her bed. Now, in this bedroom, except for the wall of ancient books that couldn't be turned over which belonged to Baligaju, the rest of the things such as guns, swords, etc. were all hers. Not to mention those sparkling and shiny armament components scattered all over the floor. Therefore, when Baligaju was busy, she would curl up on the bed, nimbly developing new armaments, never taking a single step out of her bedroom. In fact, our mercenary queen was a homebody. If he could sit, he would definitely not stand. If he could lie down, he would definitely not sit. She would only leave her beloved red wine, guns, and luxurious bed when she went out to fight. Now in the palace, although there was no red wine to drink, it was still very comfortable to play. He didn't know if Baligaju had given any orders. Ever since she moved to the palace, no one had dared to look for her. Sai, as a well-mannered and domineering Su, she was also very distressed that her other half was so capable. In reality, the royal family was currently sitting in the imperial study, dealing with the ministers who had come to ask for the armament. It's just an armament. Why would Lord Hong want to exchange it? It doesn't need to go through Wei Wei's hands. Someone will deliver the armament to your residence tonight. Lord Hong was very old and was one of the ministers by the retired emperor's side. His words carried some weight. Now that he heard Baligaju's words, he smiled with satisfaction and happily went home to wait. After Baligaju finished dealing with this matter, he stood up from the carved wooden chair that he had been busy with the whole day. He stretched out his hand to loosen his collar and said to Shadow, who was standing at the side, "In a while, go pick up an armament that the Princess Consort doesn't want and have someone send it to the Hong family's old residence." Yes. Shadow silently lowered his head. He really couldn't bear to let these people know that the armament that they wanted to buy at a high price was just a defective toy that the Princess Consort didn't want. That's right, it was a toy. It couldn't even be counted as an armament. But His Highness had this kind of ability. A pile of scrap metal could be sold at a sky-high price. It was such a pity that he didn't go into business. Baligaju looked at the color of the sky outside and flipped through the few memorials. Feeling that it was about time, he simply had someone send the rest of the memorials back to the emperor. After that, he walked towards the sleeping quarters. Hellion Vivian saw that he had returned and immediately took out the delicacies that she had prepared to share with him. Eat a piece of apricot cake. After saying that, she moved the box in front of Beligaju. The imperial family's tea brewing skills were better than anyone else's. The tea brewed by him was indeed more fragrant than usual. His white hand held the porcelain cup. After seeing her movements, his long eyebrows raised. Feed it to me. Hellion Vivian saw that he couldn't free his hands and didn't refuse. She directly sent the apricot cake to Beligaju's mouth. Only she didn't know if it was intentional or not, but when he was eating the cake, the tip of his tongue gently swept across her finger. Hellion Vivian suddenly felt an electric shock. The cake in her hand almost fell to the ground. Why are you so careless? He reached out and supported her. His eyes looked at her deeply. Hold it steady. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. When she saw his smile that wasn't a smile, she only felt that it was bad. Without thinking, she tiptoed and kissed him. Beligaju seemed to have never expected that she would do this. The evil smile on his mouth stiffened and his body paused for half a second. He pulled her whole body over and kissed her like a blooming datura flower, emitting a seductive smell. From the beginning to the end, Beligaju was a man that people were willing to indulge in. If he wanted to, his gentleness could almost drown people to death. Hellion Vivian was gently kissed behind her ear and her body trembled. His hand didn't have the slightest intention of stopping. It slid down Hellion Vivian's clothes and went all the way down. Hellion Vivian suddenly trembled. Her eyes widened and she subconsciously wanted to struggle, but her hand was pressed down by him. Beligaju hugged her from behind and coaxed her in a deep voice. Don't move. Be good. Waves of numbness passed from the man's slender fingers to Hellion Vivian's limbs. Hellion Vivian was sweating. She was like a fish out of water. She bit her lips hard. Although it was very comfortable, it was very embarrassing. She couldn't help but hug the person who was abusing her and wanted to beg Beligaju to let her go. Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian's red lips and frowned. He gently scolded, let go. If you break it, call out if you feel comfortable. There are only two of us here. Hellion Vivian still didn't speak. The red color on her face was especially beautiful. Beligaju's eyes suddenly darkened as he looked at her. He pulled her into his arms and pressed against her softness through the cotton-padded clothes. You will definitely feel more comfortable like this, right? As he spoke, he pushed her up. Hellion Wei's face reddened by another layer. She couldn't say anything embarrassing and could only gasp for breath. Chapter 4:18. Beligaju was not in a hurry. He rubbed her over and over again. Finally, he heard the answer he wanted, but he could not control himself. Remembering that someone else was coming in, he restrained himself. He hugged Hellion Vivian in his arms and calmed his breathing. He just hugged her. He did not do anything. But there was something else. She kissed him again, the corner of her mouth slightly curved. Beligaju whispered in her ear, "Don't provoke me." Hellion Vivian smiled with a hint of devilishness and laziness. She did not know if it was because couples who fell in love like to be close to each other. She only knew that she liked the feeling of skin on skin. The kiss also happened naturally. The sweet taste of the tip of the tongue was very infatuating. At this moment, Yunbiluo was chatting and laughing with the ladies who saw the announcement. Sister Yun, you are so awesome. You got first place in such a short time. That's right. This appearance appraisal is not only for the people in the capital. I'm afraid the most beautiful person in the entire War Dragon Empire is Sister Yun. Yunbiluo listened to their words and smiled gently. She looked like a sickly beauty, delicate and lovable. It's just a coincidence. Jiao Er's appearance is not worse than mine. What's her ranking? Speaking of Jiao Er, it's really strange. Those people shook their heads. I don't know what happened. Suddenly, someone appeared and took Jiao Er's second place. Yunbiluo was also surprised. Someone is prettier than Jiao Er? What's her serial number? Number 5. Yunbiluo's hand that was holding the fan paused. What number did you say was second? Number 5. That person looked at Yunbiluo's suddenly pale face in confusion. Sister Yun, what's wrong with you? Are you feeling unwell again? Yunbiluo shook her head with a forced smile, but her hand was stronger. Number 5? She was number 5. Which meant she was second. The first place in the appearance appraisal was someone else. How was this possible? Who is first? Yun Biluo flipped through her things in a place where no one could see. Her slender eyebrows furrowed. Later on, those people said something else. Yun Biluo could no longer listen. She had never expected such an outcome, because she really couldn't think of anyone in Beijing who could match her in terms of appearance. Who was that person? On the other hand, Helian Jiaoer also felt a little gloomy because she couldn't find any information about that village girl. She didn't believe that she couldn't deal with a slut with no power and influence. Since she couldn't find out who she was now, she would wait until the selection of the secondary consort and defeat her on the spot. The first test was to test everyone's martial qi level. Maybe the other party was just a piece of trash who couldn't even light up a crystal ball. The purpose of the appearance evaluation was to select the first batch of candidates. Basically, only 10 people were selected. She believed that among these 10 people, no one was her match except for Yun Biluo. In addition, she had the help of the official in charge, Lord Liao. She didn't believe that she couldn't win this secondary consort. As long as she became the secondary consort, she would immediately let that little slut Helian Vivian have a taste of the humiliation she had inflicted on her these days. An ugly woman with no qualifications dared to challenge her everywhere. She could even conquer a man who was 20 years older than her. Could that ugly woman? Just like what her mother had said, as a woman, whether she had martial qi or not was put aside, the most important thing was her face. Heh. Helian Jiaoer laughed wantonly. She couldn't wait to see how ugly that little slut's face would be when she found out that she was the secondary consort. Alright, stop looking for her. We'll talk about it when the time comes. That's right. It wouldn't be too late to make a move when she saw that village girl. After searching for a day, there was no news at all. It was a waste of energy. At night, the shadows of the trees swayed and the lights were bright. The 9th palace where the retired emperor lived was the quietest palace in the palace. Now Helian Vivian and Beligaju were sitting opposite the retired emperor. The table was full of dishes and it was a feast for the eyes. The retired emperor looked at Helian Vivian. It was obvious that he had something to say. He hesitated for a while and finally said, Ju, since Wei Wei is here, I'll say it clearly. You must go to the secondary consort selection tomorrow. If you don't go, you should know what will happen. Your qualification to be the crown prince will be revoked. He didn't want to see his grandson, the only one who could inherit the War Dragon Empire, ruined because of such a thing. Therefore, the retired emperor mentioned the ancestral rule. Bailey Jiaju was still feeding her as before, but this time he put down the bamboo chopsticks in his hand halfway through the meal. The light in his eyes faintly swept a glance at retired emperor as he said a few words. Then cancel it. The retired emperor's face stiffened and he was about to lose his temper. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows at this time and said in a clear voice, What if the secondary consort selection is held as usual? No one will revoke his qualification to be the crown prince, right? The retired emperor nodded and heaved a long sigh. Girl, can you agree to it? This cold guy must be afraid that you will feel wronged, so during this period of time, whoever mentions the selection of the secondary consort, he will make trouble for them. These 2 days the whole morning court has been in a mess and the ministers have a lot of opinions. Tell them to come to me if they have any opinions. Beligaju's tone was very indifferent, but there was a strong sense of hostility in the coldness. The retired emperor didn't want to see him lose control, but he had to do something to stop people from talking. Helian Vivian glanced at the retired emperor and looked at Beligaju. Then she reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. I want to talk to my father. Emperor father is going to have a good talk. Don't interrupt. Hearing this, Beligaju raised his lower lip and the corners of his mouth curved into a playful smile. This little girl dared to order him? Heh. Very well, he wanted to hear what she wanted to say. Imperial grandfather. Helian Wei Wei chuckled as she met retired emperor's eyes. Selecting a secondary consort is fine, but I've heard that the reason why we want to select a secondary consort is because of the rules passed down by our ancestors. When the heir apparent reaches adulthood, he must find a girl who is extremely beautiful no matter in terms of martial qi or appearance to assist the heir apparent. Only then can we guarantee the prosperity and power of our Dragon War Empire. Since you want to find a more perfect woman, it should be okay if I participate in the secondary consort selection, right? The retired emperor was stunned and said, No problem, but he didn't forget that the reason why the secondary consort selection was held was because her face was too dark. Now this girl said that she wanted to participate in the secondary consort selection. Chapter 419. But your face. The retired emperor who was used to giving orders hesitated. He was satisfied with his granddaughter-in-law, Helene Vivian, from the bottom of his heart. But the imperial family was the imperial family after all. There were many things to consider, and Wei Wei's face was the key. Helene Vivian knew what the retired emperor meant. She smiled gently. "Imperial grandfather, don't worry. I will solve it myself." The retired emperor wanted to ask her how she was going to solve it. This person couldn't suddenly become white. But if Wei Wei was really chosen, she wouldn't be too bad. Then he would have an excuse to stop Aju from choosing this side consort. The retired emperor smiled. "Go ahead and participate. Grandfather will help you. Even if you can't get the first place, grandfather will let you enter the top 5. As long as you enter the top 5, everything will be fine. But you must be prepared to dress up." Helene Vivian nodded. "I know." The retired emperor always admired her calmness. He ordered Eunuch Sun, "Give all the information about the side consort selection to Wei Wei later." "Yes." After Eunuch Sun acknowledged the order, he glanced at Helene Wei Wei again. The astonishment in his heart had yet to subside. Logically speaking, the princess consort's current appearance should not be exposed in front of everyone. She was so ugly and disgraceful. Once it was announced, it was bound to attract even more dissatisfaction. Because those people would wonder why such an ugly woman could become the third princess consort. On the contrary, they didn't get chosen because they had everything they wanted. In the past, he didn't understand that there were so many women in the world. Why did His Highness only like this person? Now that he saw so much, he finally understood. Although there were many women in the world, Helene Vivian was the only one who approached His Highness without any purpose. Even he, who had been with His Highness all year round, would feel the horror of being with a monarch was like being with a tiger because of His Highness's viciousness from time to time. But this didn't seem to exist for Helene Vivian. She just treated His Highness as a man, an ordinary man that she liked. Ever since Wang Fei entered the palace, His Highness had smiled more and more often. His doting towards Wang Fei was out of everyone's expectations. He had been in the palace for a long time and had seen many spoiled concubines. Once she was favored, she would become different from before. She would always beat and scold the palace maids and eunuchs under her. At this time, Helene Vivian was only a teenage girl, but she gave people a sense of calmness in the face of change. Don't be fooled by the fact that she usually looked lazy and didn't do anything. Every movement of hers carried a sense of oppression. He was never arrogant and was even more courteous to old people like them. Such a woman was too suitable for the dark and gloomy palace. She was different from His Highness. His Highness was the kind of person that, no matter how holy and radiant he looked on the surface, he was cold to the bone. His eyes were so cold that he could fall at any time. On the other hand, Helene Vivian clearly knew everything, but she couldn't feel any gloominess from her. She was brilliant, lazy, and tenacious, just like a warm light. Not only His Highness, but even the servants also liked to stay by Wang Fei's side. Thus Eunuch Sun was really worried. He was even more anxious than Helene Vivian, the person involved. He had to find a concubine with the best makeup skills to do Wang Fei's makeup. And clothes. Yes, that's right. He had a lot of connections in his hands, so it wasn't a problem to find a tailor. Most importantly, time was too tight. The secondary consort selection was tomorrow. God, why did he always have the feeling of marrying off his daughter? No, he had to make preparations. Thus, before the banquet ended, Eunuch Sun found an excuse to let someone else take the blame. Even when the Emperor Emeritus sent someone to find him, he only gave 2 words. "I'm busy." The person who came was shocked. One had to know that Eunuch Sun was usually the most loyal person. Today he actually dared to say, "I'm busy" to the Emperor Emeritus? Of course, the person who reported wouldn't really tell the Emperor Emeritus these 2 words. He only said that Eunuch Sun couldn't get away and would come back when he was free. In the end, when the banquet ended, Eunuch Sun still didn't appear. Instead, he asked those little brats raised by him to use all their connections to find what Helene Vivian would wear on the day of the consort selection. Looking at the priceless clothes one after another in front of his eyes, he felt that he was very cute when he was being serious. On the other hand, when Beligaju went out, the Emperor Emeritus deliberately called Hellion Vivian to the side and sighed deeply. Girl, grandfather made this decision, don't blame grandfather. I won't. Hellion Vivian poured a cup of tea for him. I know the situation in the imperial court now. Grandfather, don't worry, I'm not someone who can be bullied by anyone. When the Emperor Emeritus heard what she said, the guilt in his heart deepened. I'm not good enough. Aju's father is even worse. Since he was young, if this child wasn't ruthless, he wouldn't have survived to this point. Someone once said that the descendants of the Bailey family are cold-blooded and heartless. Even if they have a noble status, they are just living dead. Those who were punished by him even cursed that he would never know how to and was destined to be lonely for life. So many years have passed and he doesn't have a single person by his side. To be honest, I used to suspect that he liked men. Hellion Vivian really wanted to shake hands with the Emperor Emeritus. She also suspected so. Later, I found out that he wasn't interested in anyone. The Emperor Emeritus lowered his eyes. Deep regret was written on his face. It's lonely at the top. I sent him to that position too early, but I didn't take responsibility. Later, when I found out that he was rejected by his mother, everything was too late. In this palace, no one can be trusted. The other princes at least have their mothers who treat them wholeheartedly. It's fine if Juer has to guard against others, but he also has to guard against his mother. Later, when the Murong family entered the palace, his methods became colder and colder. He never thought about being with anyone. That girl was left to him by his mother. He treated that girl differently. I used to suspect that he would choose that girl as his concubine when he comes of age. Now I found out that I was wrong. There are many things that can make him smile. But you are the first person who can make him so uneasy. You don't know how shocked I was when he told me that he would never choose a secondary consort because you would definitely run away. The Emperor Emeritus smiled at Hellion Vivian. Although I don't want to admit it, but as those people said, he is heartless and never cares about anything. Now he finally has someone who he cares about. Even if this person becomes his weakness, grandfather is happy. Chapter 420. Hellion Wei quietly listened and didn't interrupt retired emperor at all. She was just like a junior sitting by retired emperor's side, slowly drinking the tea in her hand. She only smiled gently at the end of the conversation. Grandfather, don't worry. If that day really comes, I won't be his weakness. She had always wanted to be more than just a concubine in the harem. Since he liked her, of course she would do her best. Hellion Vivian thought of this and her voice became clearer. Whether it's a chess piece or the sword in his hand, I hope that when he sees the throne he will think of me, Hellion Vivian. The retired emperor seemed to be shocked by her words. His eyes flickered and he smiled with relief. No wonder Juger chose you. Hellion Vivian didn't think much of it. As a domineering president, wasn't it her duty to protect her beloved other half? When Beligaju came in, he saw the two of them talking. He raised his eyebrows. What are you talking about? Nothing. Hellion Vivian stretched. What did you do just now? Bailey Jiaju opened his mouth indifferently. Eunuch Sun has some matters to attend to. Oh, since you have something to do, let's go back first. Hellion Vivian said as she stood up. Didn't an old man ask for martial arts from you? I can make 2 for him when I go back. No need. I've already ordered someone to send it. Beligaju reached out and picked up the cloak on the chair. His eyes met the retired emperor's. Hellion Vivian also looked at the retired emperor. Imperial grandfather will go first. Go. The retired emperor waved his hand. He looked like an ordinary old man. Hellion Vivian was still thinking about the retired emperor's words when she saw the slender and indifferent figure walking in front of her. She reached out and held his empty hand. Then their fingers interlocked. Beligaju curved his thin lips and led Hellion Vivian into the bedroom as if he was leading a child. Then he rubbed her head and said, Sleep first if you're sleepy. You still want to go out? Hellion Vivian yawned. Beligaju nodded. There's a small matter that needs to be dealt with. Oh. Hellion Vivian automatically followed. Beligaju looked back at her and said with a smile, You don't have to go with me. What's the big deal? I want to eat the apricot cakes you prepared today. Pick out a few more pieces. All right. Hellion Vivian hugged her blanket and began to rummage through her snack box. leaving Beligaju to do his own thing. Bailey Jiaju smiled. After he put on an outer robe and walked into the night, the gentleness on his face disappeared in a flash. He ordered coldly, except for the imperial guards, call everyone in the palace to the study room. The accompanying palace servant hurriedly left. In a short while, a palace maid of about 17 or 18 years old knelt on the steps outside the study. She was trembling as she was escorted by 2 guards. She was so scared that her face was as white as a sheet. Beligaju looked down at her and sneered, "Who gave you the courage to spread rumors about the princess consort, huh?" I. The palace maid had been in the palace for many years and knew Yun Biluo. She had always thought that since Miss Yun would participate in the secondary consort selection this time, there would be no need for a princess consort in the palace in the future. When the time came, it would be obvious that she would be favored. Therefore, she wanted to help Miss Yun in advance. Besides, everyone knew that the princess consort was ugly. She did not understand why His Highness was so angry. However, it was too late when she understood. Beligaju glanced at her indifferently. "Take her away." "Yes." And Ing approached and waited for Beligaju's instructions in a low voice. "Your Highness, the palace servants are here." Beligaju's tone was neither cold nor indifferent. He only said 2 simple words, "Put her to death." The palace maid obviously did not expect Beligaju to kill her directly without asking. In a panic, she screamed at the top of her voice, "Your Highness, please spare my life. I'll tell you everything." The palace maid was so scared that she struggled unconsciously. And Ing knocked her head with the hilt of his sword. Blood spurted out. Bailey Jiaju laughed. That was a gloomy coldness that had never been shown in front of Hellion Wei Wei. "Be careful with your movements. After you stuff his mouth, beat him slowly. It's fine as long as he dies within 2 hours. Move further away, don't let the princess consort hear you." "Yes," and Ing took the order and retreated. He knew very well what His Highness meant. Anyone who dared to set their sights on the princess consort had to die. This was not the first batch. The last time the matter was dealt with at White Academy, they were all clear. The princess consort had been in the palace for such a long time. It was not that no one talked about it, but once it was found out, His Highness would not let them live until the next morning. Now Ing finally understood that His Highness really cared about the princess consort. Beligaju turned and entered the inner room. Hellion Vivian was picking out the hard-to-find apricot cakes for him. Occasionally she would take a sip of tea. Every time Beligaju looked at her puppy-like appearance, his heart would soften. Just looking at Hellion Vivian like this, it was as if the hostility in his body would naturally disappear. His prey was so obedient. Those who were not afraid of death and still gossiped behind her back. They deserved to be killed. However, he dealt with these people today not only because of this. The most important thing was that there was someone who wanted to leak his daily activities to her. When Bailey Jiaju thought of that possibility, his pair of eyes immediately emerged with a touch of shocking hostility. Hellion Vivian, who was aware of this hostility, held the snack box and looked up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Beligaju smiled. "I'm going to take a bath first. When Eunuch Sun comes, let him find me in the bathroom." Hellion Vivian nodded. Looking at his back, she suddenly said, "Actually, I don't hate the smell of blood." Beligaju suddenly paused. His eyes darkened. "What smell of blood? I'm just used to taking a bath. Be good and wait for me to come back." He threw this sentence with a faint smile and left the bedroom. In the end, he was still discovered. It seems that in the future, when he makes a move, he should be further away. Eunuch Sun happened to hear the conversation between the 2 people outside. He went forward and carefully tidied up Beligaju's robe. In a low voice, he advised, "If His Highness really likes the princess consort, he shouldn't spoil her like this. Since he's spoiling her, it's not good to let others know that the princess consort can make His Highness care so much. This may not be a good thing." Beligaju chuckled and slightly raised his head. His slender fingers untied his collar. With a smile, he said, "Then what does Eunuch Sun think this Highness should do?" Chapter 421. Since ancient times, other monarchs would find a scapegoat to block the spear for the woman they love. "Your Highness, why don't you?" Eunuch Sun's words hadn't yet finished when he was interrupted by Bailey Jiaju's indifferent tone. His voice was as cold as usual. That kind of stupid thing should be left to those who don't have the means to do it. I just want to let everyone in the world know that Hellion Wei Wei is mine. As for those who want to obstruct me, I'll kill them all." When Beligaju said the last words, Eunuch Sun inexplicably shuddered. He turned back and looked lightly at Eunuch Sunday. "Do not let Wang Fei know of today's matter. This servant understands." Eunuch Sun hurriedly lowered his eyes and didn't dare to speak more. When Beligaju finished bathing and entered the bedroom, Hellion Vivian was already asleep. She was lying on her side on the bed made of pure gold. She was still holding the snack box. The inside was filled with almond cakes that had been divided. Bailey Jiaju stared at her for a while. Then he bent down and hugged her in his arms as if he was hugging his favorite toy. "You're the only one in this world who can't betray me." Outside, the night grew darker. At this time, the harem girls of every family were preparing for the upcoming Ce Fei selection. After Wei Wei got up, she didn't choose the clothes that Eunuch Sun handed over. While using peppermint water to rinse her mouth, she absent-mindedly said, "Yesterday His Highness' mood wasn't too good. You should let those old people understand. I have some money here. Eunuch Sun should be clear on who to give it to." Eunuch Sun's hand that was arranging the clothes suddenly stopped. He raised his head and looked at Hellion Vivian, his eyes filled with shock. "Wang Fei knew what happened last night?" Hellion Vivian didn't know the specifics, but she could roughly guess. She smiled at Eunuch Sun and said, "Your Highness isn't a bad person. Eunuch Sun is a smart man and has been by His Highness' side for the longest time. I believe Eunuch Sun understands His Highness better than I do. I won't say anything else. You can divide the silver as you see fit. Eunuch Sun is a smart man and has been by His Highness' side for the longest time. I believe Eunuch Sun understands His Highness better than I do. I won't say anything else. You can divide the silver as you see fit." If it were someone else, Eunuch Sun would definitely push the money away. But now he knew that Wang Fei was throwing money to restore His Highness' reputation. He had served 3 generations of emperors and empresses. But none of them would treat people like this girl. This way of doing things really made one's heart warm. She wondered how His Highness would feel when he found out. Eunuch Sun smiled like a flower and immediately replied, "Yes." He then took the silver and went to the various palaces. When the old people saw the silver, not only did they feel relieved, they also called their disciples and grand-disciples over. Fang Yan said, "Whoever dares to say anything bad about His Highness and Wang Fei again, I'll break their legs." Eunuch Sun listened with a smile. Toward the end, he remembered that they were going to select a secondary consort later. By the time they rushed back to the palace, Hellion Vivian had already washed up. She wore a long, fiery red dress that resembled a battle robe. The mermaid-like hem of the dress was parted, and her straight legs were vaguely exposed. She exuded the noble and graceful aura of a queen. In addition, her fair fingers were holding a pure black feathered umbrella. Every move of hers was refined and elegant, causing others to suddenly feel a sense of beauty as if she was waving her brush and splashing ink. Some people had great charisma. They weren't ostentatious or eye-catching. They were like snowflakes falling from the sky, cold and noble, silent, humble and polite. Especially her pair of eyes, which were bright and clear. The smile on her lips was clean and gentle, and there was something different about her. Eunuch Sun thought in a daze that if it wasn't for Wang Fei's face, Wang Fei would be able to enter the top 5 based on her aura. However, he could only think about it secretly because Wang Fei's complexion completely denied everything. "Let's go," Hellion Vivian said with a smile. She put on her serial number and walked out of the bedroom first. Eunuch Sun followed behind her. His mind was filled with thoughts of how to cheat and make people focus on this girl's aura and ignore her appearance. Time passed very quickly. After it officially entered the middle of summer, it was hot everywhere. Therefore, the first test for the secondary consort selection outside the palace was specially chosen to be held early in the morning. Although it was early in the morning, there were still many people standing on tiptoes to look around. They wanted to see for themselves who was the most beautiful girl in the capital city. Hellion Jiaoer was the most excited because even if she wasn't chosen as the secondary consort, Yun Biluo would enter the palace. By then, it would be a piece of cake for her to see Hellion Vivian make a fool of herself. Yun Biluo also came early. She was wearing a dress that was specially made at the royal cloth shop last time. It was a first-class long dress embroidered with ripples of peony. It was pure white and matched with a robe of the same color. Her long black hair was held up with an ancient hairpin, with a few strands of hair hanging down, complemented by transparent pearls. It made her look like a fairy who walked out of a painting. She was warm and gentle like water. Especially when she smiled, there was a faint shyness on her face. She had already charmed all the young masters. No wonder Sister Yoon could get the first place, she's so beautiful. Someone praised. Yoon Biluo smiled and pinched the person's face. You're not bad yourself. However, the title of the first place always made her feel uncomfortable. Only she knew that she wasn't the first place in the appearance evaluation. However, she couldn't show any difference. She could only pretend now. When she really won the competition, no one would care if she was the first place in the appearance evaluation. Thinking of this, Yoon Biluo smiled faintly. She coughed once in a while, which made her look even more delicate and beautiful. Hellion Jiao obviously didn't care about these things. She started looking for the woman who was holding an umbrella and wearing a red robe the moment she entered. However, after searching for a long time, she couldn't even find a figure wearing similar clothes. Hellion Jiao thought about it again. How could she forget? Since Lord Liao had agreed to this, he would definitely help her look for her. It was very likely that he found her now and used some tricks to prevent that woman from appearing here. Hellion Jiao thought about this and the corner of her mouth lifted into a smile. She used to say that people shouldn't think too highly of themselves. She thought that she had some beauty and wanted to stand out in this kind of situation. What a fool's dream. She should take a look at her own status. Hellion Jiao ran her hands through her long hair. Without that stumbling block, her chances of winning would be higher. Once the secondary consort selection was over, that ugly Hellion Vivian's good days would come to an end. Chapter 422. Not long after, there was a huge commotion at the entrance of the long street. The Hellion Jiao turned her head and saw a group of guards walking toward them. They made a path in the crowd in an orderly manner. The ceremonial equipment used by the royal family was originally luxurious. Among them, there was a dark black palanquin that took up all the elegance. Needless to say, everyone knew who was sitting in it. Some people could not help but guess that the royal family and the civil and military officials were here to select the most beautiful woman in the capital city. Perhaps they had been disgusted with Hellion Vivian's ugly face for a long time. This time they had a good reason to select a pleasing woman to enter the palace. After all, a man like the third prince needed a beautiful woman to be a match for him, and he could go on a long journey. The Hellion Jiao thought so too, because they did not receive the notice of the return of the royal family from the beginning. Now that they saw them, they were naturally happy. No matter what the royal family did to her before, he did not care. Now as long as she saw Hellion Vivian suffer, she felt happy. Perhaps what Yoon Biluo said was true. On the surface, the third prince looked like he did not want to get close to Yoon Biluo. In fact, it was only because he could not let go of what happened in the past. But deep down he still cared about Yoon Biluo. Otherwise, why did he show up in the secondary consort selection now? He must want to see Yoon Biluo being selected. When the Hellion Jiao thought of this, she looked at Yoon Biluo. She saw that she was looking at the third prince who was sitting in the palanquin with reddened eyes. She was even more certain that in this secondary consort selection, even if she did not win, Yoon Biluo would win. Basically, it had nothing to do with others. However, what she did not expect was that the person who followed Beligaju out of the palanquin was the little bitch Hellion Vivian. Shouldn't she be hiding in the palace and not daring to show herself? Why did she come to join in the fun on such an occasion? The Hellion Jiao frowned in confusion. Then she heard Eunuch Sun say in a loud and clear voice, "Since the last contestant is here, I announce the start of the first round of the competition." What does this mean? Hellion Jiao looked at Hellion Vivian and showed the first serial number in her hand to the staff member. That person looked like he had been struck by lightning. It was clearly inconceivable. He probably couldn't believe that such an ugly person like Hellion Vivian dared to participate in the selection. Was she here to be scolded? When Yoon Biluo saw Hellion Vivian, a dark light flashed across her eyes. However, she did not show it on her face. She lowered her eyes and no one knew what she was thinking. Hellion Vivian's arrival caused an uproar. Some people felt that she was always creating miracles and their blood was boiling. However, most people still felt that it would be better for her to stay in the palace and save herself from humiliation. I heard that during the White Academy's assessment, she didn't even light up the crystal ball. I wonder if she can be a little more capable this time? That's not necessarily the case. She won the competition some time ago. However, she didn't emit martial chi at that time. It's hard to say this time. Silence everyone. Lord Liao, who was dressed in his official uniform, stood up and gestured with his hand. From now on, you will enter the small door at the side according to your serial number. Those who lose will not have the chance to participate in the final round. In other words, in order to ensure the speed of the secondary consort selection, he wanted to eliminate the next batch and let the remaining few undergo the crystal ball test in front of everyone. There was no problem at first, but the Hellion Jiaoer suddenly realized that all the contestants with serial numbers were present. That meant that woman was here too? The strange thing was that she couldn't see her. The Hellion Jiaoer entered the first round of the test in confusion. No matter what, as long as she could let everyone know that Hellion Vivian was an ugly good-for-nothing, it was really a good thing. As there were many people in the test, no one knew which courtyard they entered. In the end, no one could tell what was going on. Someone said, "Do you still need to think? The third princess consort will definitely lose." Seeing that his master didn't speak, the little one with a gourd on his back turned his big round eyes and pointed at the judge's paper. Those who are eliminated will be marked with a heavy cross. Hellion Vivian's name is still there. Didn't you notice? They really didn't notice. Because in their minds, Hellion Wei Wei would definitely not be able to pass the first round. That was something that was already set in stone. But who knew? Not only did Hellion Vivian not lose the first round, but her name was still on the list after the results of 3 rounds in a row? Why was this matter getting weirder and weirder the more they thought about it? Just as everyone was wondering what was going on, the finalists on the stage stood in a straight line in front of everyone. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw Hellion Vivian beside her, a trace of surprise flashed across her eyes. But this was good too. She was already at gold level 9, one more level away from the maximum level. No matter how powerful Hellion Vivian was, she was at most a water level. She clearly knew Hellion Vivian's tricks. During the previous competition, the gentleness she revealed was probably a water level. That was why she said that this was good too. Because of this, she would have a chance to viciously beat Hellion Vivian once in front of everyone. More importantly, although she didn't know Hellion Vivian's number. Looking at the list, it was obvious that she was behind Yun Biluo. Everyone knew that Yun Biluo's martial chi was unfathomable. It was very likely that she had reached gold level 10. If Hellion Vivian was tested behind such a person, the more obvious the contrast was, the more everyone would think that the little bitch was not good enough for the third prince. At that time, she and Yun Biluo would attack her from the front and back, which would show Hellion Vivian's incompetence. "Sister, I didn't expect you to come." Hellion Jiaoer smiled at her. "But don't worry, Sister Yun and I will go easy on you. Don't you think so, Sister Yun?" Yun Biluo was even more gentle and beautiful. She looked at Hellion Vivian with pity. "As long as it can clear up the misunderstanding between me and Wei Wei, I'm willing to do anything." Wei Wei's gaze faintly swept over those two people. Someone as intelligent as her, how could she not know what the other party was planning? She curved her thin lips and didn't waste her energy on this kind of matter like who tested first. To her it didn't matter who tested first. Eunuch's son didn't want Hellion Vivian to be behind Yun Biluo. After all, Yun Biluo's martial chi was very abundant. If she was tested after her, it would be more embarrassing than usual. But now that the rules of the competition had been set, it couldn't be changed. Chapter 423. Eunuch's son could only watch anxiously as Yun Biluo walked up to the arena. She then took a step forward and placed her hand on the transparent crystal ball. In an instant, a bright orange-yellow light rose from the bottom of the crystal ball. It was shining brightly and was so pure that it was almost perfect. At that moment the crowd surged. "It's gold level 10. Oh my god. It's gold level 10. In the entire capital city, including the teachers in the White Academy, there are only a few who can reach level 10. This Miss Yun is really too amazing. She's more than amazing. Look at her face. I can't believe there's such a beauty in the capital city. This Miss Yun is definitely going to win." Yun Biluo looked at the influence she had created. Her lips curled into a bashful smile. She said to those people, "Thank you." She had mastered the technique of winning people's hearts. The next one was Hellion Vivian. The Hellion Jower stood steadily at the side, waiting to see how Hellion Vivian would make a fool of herself. Hellion Vivian walked up the stairs calmly. Without any hesitation, she reached out her jade-like hand and placed it on the crystal ball. The Hellion Jower smiled indifferently. She thought to herself that no matter how good she looked, she was just a little water rank. Why is there no movement after so long? Someone sneered. Could it be that she doesn't know how to inject martial chi into the crystal ball like the last time? Don't say that about her. After all, she's the third prince's woman. What are you worried about? She won't be the third prince's woman soon. He's so useless. She's destined to be divorced. The sarcastic remarks grew louder and louder. It sounded particularly harsh in the streets. However, Hellion Vivian did not care about the remarks around her. She seemed to be brewing something. Her slender fingers pressed on the crystal ball again and she exerted all her strength. The crystal ball made a whoosh and fog rose from all directions. An unknown wind rushed in from all directions. It whistled and buzzed as it passed. The supervisor standing next to the crystal ball was uncontrollably affected. They subconsciously looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian, and a trace of disbelief flashed through their hearts. No, it shouldn't be possible. Princess Consort was so young, it was impossible for her to use so many attributes of martial chi at the same time. The north wind was howling in the arena. The people standing below the arena felt their cheeks hurt. It took them a lot of effort to see the changes in the crystal ball. Wait a minute. What was that? Gold. They had never seen such a pure and rich golden color before. Was this the 10th stage? No, that's not right. He was even more terrifying than a 10th Dan fighter. What was even more frightening was that after the golden color disappeared, the air flow in the crystal ball did not calm down. Instead, it turned into a rich brown color. That was the wood rank. How was that possible? Everyone knew that metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were originally 5 different elements. If they were fused together, it would be very easy for them to reject each other. If they did not cultivate well, they would definitely go crazy. That was why everyone wanted to level up step by step. But now, Hellion Vivian was actually wantonly controlling the colors in the crystal ball. Each color was bright to the extreme. Finally, the crystal ball turned into a multicolored light, lighting up everyone's eyes. Hellion Vivian stood there, one hand holding the crystal ball. Her long black hair moved with the wind. She was indescribably handsome. At the same time, everyone present, no matter if they were nobles or commoners, were all dumbfounded. Because they all knew that there was no need to compete in the following crystal ball test. In this world, only the third prince had revealed 3 types of martial chi elements. No matter how powerful the others were, they were only at the nascent soul stage. It was too unexpected. The Hellion family's eldest daughter, who was called a good-for-nothing and a love-struck fool, was actually able to control all the elements of martial chi. And when those martial chi were in her hands, she casually played it like a game. After seeing this scene, Hellion Jiao Air's entire face turned pale. She firmly grasped both of her hands. Her pair of eyes swayed as she watched Wei Wei walk down from the stage. She couldn't wait to check if there was any problem with that crystal ball. Eunuch Su was also stunned. His mouth was wide open as he glanced at Beligaju, who was still sitting lazily with a cold expression. Seeing that his own master did not have a surprised expression. Then he figured out what was going on. Everything about the princess consort his master should have known. Otherwise, he would not have agreed to the selection of a secondary consort. Eunuch Sun's mood changed from apprehension to excitement. He looked on excitedly. Since the previous crystal ball test had never had such a situation, the evaluators were also a little dumbfounded. However, very quickly, they suppressed the shock in their hearts and announced the next contestant's name absent-mindedly. However, everyone knew in their hearts that there was no need to compete in this test at all. Unless Hellion Jiaoer could also ignite all 5 elements in the crystal ball, perhaps she still had a chance to win. However, the next result was not the slightest bit of suspense. Hellion Jiaoer's complacent gold level 9 was simply not enough compared to the 5-colored crystal ball. Hellion Vivian seemed to always be like this. Every time she would refresh their understanding of her. What kind of good-for-nothing was she? This was simply a once-in-a-decade, no, a once-in-a-century genius. Now I announce that the third princess consort is the winner. Eunuch Sun finished his words. Baligaju, who was sitting at the side, stood up. There seemed to be a smile in his eyes, but that kind of smile made people feel cold from the heart. His hand intentionally or unintentionally turned his pinky ring, and his voice was clear and noble. Aning, have you remembered what I asked you to remember? Aning lowered his eyes. Yes. Then read it to them so that they can understand why I cut off their tongues. Baligaju said it casually. However, as Aning said the names one by one, those who were gossiping about Hellion Vivian just now all knelt on the ground, their clothes soaked in cold sweat. They had never expected such a result. In their hearts, the third prince should have wanted to replace Hellion Vivian long ago. Why did he stand up for her like this? Could it be that the previous rumors were all false? Once they thought of this possibility, those people's faces seemed to have lost all color. They were so pale that it was frightening. Take her away. It was just 3 words, but it made people feel an unprecedented murderous intent. Yun Biluo's eyes were shaking as she watched this scene. Her hands were clenched subtly. When she faced the crowd's gaze, her eyes were a little red, but there was still a smile at the corner of her mouth, as if she was complaining about her grievances. The bystanders did not dare to criticize Hellion Vivian, but some of the ladies who were close to Yun Biluo still lowered their voices and whispered in her ear, Sister Yun, don't be sad. No matter how strong you are, if your appearance is bad, it's useless. Chapter 424. This person was right. No matter how well one won in the cultivation test, as long as one's appearance was not good enough, everything else would be useless. Now, Hellion Vivian's biggest weakness was her appearance. There was nothing wrong with her facial features. It was just that her face was too dark and there were freckles on her face. It was really difficult for her to appear elegant. With such a face, how could she win against Yun Biluo, who was known as a gentle beauty? Sister Yun, you have to look at the bright side. Everyone knows that you're the winner of the appearance evaluation. There's no doubt that you'll win the next round, and some people will definitely be kicked out of the competition. The person spoke in a soft voice that no one else could hear, except for Yun Biluo's ears. However, Yun Biluo knew how to behave. She smiled gently. Other than me, there are many sisters who are great beauties, such as you, Sister Lan. Besides, she still did not know who was the first in the appearance test. Besides what? Yun Biluo coughed weakly, which made people feel more tender. Nothing, I just feel that no matter how beautiful I am, I can't get into His Highness's eyes. Sister Yun, don't say that. Since His Highness is here, it proves that he has you in his heart. Yun Biluo smiled through her tears. She looked so innocent. Really? Of course it's true. The person glanced at Hellion Vivian as she spoke. After the crystal ball test, there were only 5 people left. Hellion Vivian, Yun Biluo, Hellion Jiaoer, and so on. These 5 people would enter the next round of the appearance test. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that if a swan was used as an analogy, then Hellion Vivian would be the ugly duckling that was the most uncoordinated among the 5 people. However, she was standing in the first position. When people saw her, they only remembered her dark skin. They did not even pay much attention to her facial features. Everyone was impressed by the third prince's taste. He actually chose such an ugly Wuyan as his consort. Even Lord Liao, who was in charge of the secondary consort selection this time, didn't understand. He turned his head and said loudly, "Now the second round of the beauty competition begins. After the appearance competition, you can show your serial number and see if it is the same as the one you were appraising. Ladies, please step forward and stand according to the requirements." As soon as his voice fell, the 5 of them walked up to the high ring together. As the champion of the first round, Hellion Vivian was placed in the first position without any suspense. Every beauty has a base score of 50 points. Points will be added from the base score of 50 points. The one with the highest score will be the winner. This time 3 people will be eliminated. The remaining 2 will be based on the overall score. The winner will become the third prince's concubine. As Lord Liao spoke, he looked at the commoners and officials who were selected to grade at the last minute. These 10 people were personally selected by Eunuch Sun just now. They have nothing to do with the shortlisted beauties. Everything is based on their true feelings. There is no possibility of cheating. As usual, we will grade according to the ranking order. First, we will grade Miss Lawn, who was ranked 5th in the previous round. In an instant, everyone set their eyes on Miss Lawn. Her score was not bad, but it was far worse than Yun Biluo, who came later. The third was Helian Jiaoer. Helian Jiaoer's appearance was also very gentle. In addition to the temperament that she deliberately cultivated since young, it added a lot of points to her. Even so, she did not win against Yun Biluo. Every one of those people gave Yun Biluo a high score. The lowest score was 97 points, not to mention those who gave 100 points. The scene was in an uproar. Many people cheered for Yun Biluo's high score, as if the appearance competition was over. It didn't matter whether Helian Vivian's score was given or not. Because everyone who could see clearly knew that with Helian Vivian's looks, she could only be ranked last. Lord Liao coughed softly. Silence, silence. I ask the judges to give marks for Princess Consort's appearance. Helian Jiaoer smiled at this moment. It's finally coming. What a bitch. So what if she won the cultivation test? In the end, she would still be inferior to them. Serves her right. Helian Jiaoer finally felt a little better. She looked at Helian Vivian with a gloating gaze. Yun Biluo's voice was soft. Wei, why don't we not let them grade? I'm afraid it will hurt you. On the surface, this sentence sounded like it was for Helian Vivian's good. In fact, it was implying that Helian Vivian was the one who made a fool of herself. Sister Yun, just let sister grade. Since we've come this far, she should give it a try. Once she hears everyone's score, she won't have any regrets. Helian Jiaoer continued Yun Biluo's words hypocritically. However, Helian Wei merely glanced at her with a faint smile. Then she said to Lord Liao calmly, before giving the score, I would like to wash my face so that the judges can take a good look before giving the score. Lord Liao was thinking that her face was naturally dark. What's the use of washing it? However, he ordered someone to bring a wooden basin filled with clean water. He didn't want to offend the third prince because of such a thing. Although he was on the side of the 4 influential families, he would try his best not to offend the third prince. However, he really didn't understand why the Princess Consort wanted to wash her face at this time. The rest of the people also didn't understand why Helian Vivian suddenly made such a request. Even the second young master of the He family, who always understood her, frowned. He didn't know what was going on. Only the man in white, who was standing in the crowd, paused for a moment while stroking the little one. When he raised his eyes again, his ink-like gaze fell on Helian Wei, as if it was about to overflow with a faint light. Helian Wei stood there, not paying attention to the small commotion around her because of her request. She flipped her left hand nimbly and a few fresh red strawberries magically appeared in her palm out of thin air. Yuan Ming smiled evilly while Whitey looked noble and cold. Both of them understood what Helian Vivian was going to do. Naturally, there was a playful look in their eyes. She casually crushed the strawberry juice in the wooden basin where no one could see. Then she gently scooped up the water with both hands and splashed it on her face little by little. Dear readers, please see if you can refresh the page for a new chapter. Then the author's fever hasn't subsided, so I won't be able to update for the next 2 days. After the fever subsides, I'll update for everyone. Then please pat my head and good night. Chapter 425. As she washed, it was as if some black water was flowing down her face. Her jade-like fair skin slowly bloomed in front of everyone. What is going on? Could it be that the black stuff on the Princess Consort's face can be washed away? Everyone looked at that fair skin in disbelief. Before they could see Helian Vivian's entire face, they had already stood up in shock. However, even under such burning gazes, Helian Vivian's actions were still unhurried. After she finished washing, she wiped her face with a white handkerchief. With a slight movement of her fingers, the umbrella embedded with black feathers appeared in her jade-like hands. Then she slowly raised her eyes. Her skin was like snow, her eyes were like stars, and the mole under the corner of her eye fluttered, sparkling with a little luster. In an instant, all the noise stopped. Like a lotus emerging from the mud, the bright moon rising. Everyone's eyes widened to the maximum. Looking at the person in front of them who was obviously beyond redemption, their eyes were filled with speechless shock. That lustrous white skin seemed to be shining, that flower-like oval face was sparkling like jade, and that languid smile at the corner of her mouth, It was simply breathtaking. Especially when she walked over with the black feather-folded umbrella, her sleeves, which were embroidered with silver thread, would float in the air. Below the robe, there was a small opening that followed the slender curve, giving people a kind of languid temptation. As she walked, the beautiful lines of her calves were faintly discernible, revealing her beautiful ankles. Just like that, she walked over to the judge's table. Her pupils were deeper than the others. The color was pure black, as if there was nothing in it, as if it could suck people in. Enchanting, gorgeous, languid. It was simply like a mandala flower that bloomed in the dark world, full of temptation and shapeless. Everything was silent to the extreme. Hellion Jiaoer's face was pale as she took a big step back. How is this possible? Hellion Vivian, how could she be that person? Impossible, this is impossible. No one paid attention to Hellion Jiaoer's reaction, because everyone was collectively speechless, everyone was stunned. Including Eunuch Sun and young Master He. They had imagined that if Hellion Vivian turned white she would be very beautiful. But what he didn't expect was that she would be so beautiful. She was as beautiful as a goddess descending to the mortal world, making people's hearts beat faster. Especially the kind of temperament she had, gentle like jade, lazy and enchanting. Not to mention men wanting to marry such a woman, even women would like her. He eyes pinched his thigh and felt pain. Then he turned around and asked the steward beside him in an overbearing manner, "Is that really my little sister? Your big boss?" The steward replied calmly, "Boss has used his real face several times, but the second young master was not there. You can obviously make a living with your face. Why did he have to rely on martial qi before? No, this won't do. I have to think carefully about how to protect my little sister in the future as a qualified adopted brother. Before, when I saw how safe she looked, I never considered this problem." He eyes turned his head and continued to stare at Hellion Vivian. The manager was speechless. This kind of thing should be handled by the royal family. Why are you, a Siscon, blindly joining in the fun? However, looking at the royal family's expression, they don't seem to be particularly happy. Fire Qilin, who had peeked into the steward's heart, smiled evilly and ran over to ask Beligaju, "Master, how are you feeling now?" It didn't forget what Master did when he first saw his mistress's real face. He painted her face even darker. It was obviously a tyrannical possessiveness at work, but he was so black-bellied that he didn't let anyone know. Ahi. Just when everyone was petrified, Beligaju casually glanced at Fire Qilin, who was nestled by his feet, and raised his lips with a faint smile. "You really want to know how I feel? What the fuck?" It appeared. A devilish smile. Fire Qilin's scalp went numb. Not really, if Master wants to say." Beligaju's lips overflowed with obvious evilness. "How I feel? Very simple. During this period of time, I have neglected to discipline you and fed you too little." Fire Qilin, can you not talk about such a perverted thing so casually, hey? It regretted asking about his mood. It clearly knew that Master would be unhappy, so it was simply asking for it to be tortured. After Beligaju said this, he turned his gaze back to the petrified people and slightly clenched his fingers. The feeling of having one's most precious thing being peeked at by someone else was really a little unpleasant. When he returned to the palace, he should think of a way to make her compensate. Beligaju played with the thumb ring in his hand, and the corners of his mouth slowly curled up. This was only fair, wasn't it? Hellion Vivian still didn't know what His Highness was thinking. She looked at the people who maintained the same expression and reminded them, "Judges, you can give your marks now." Only then did the judges wake up from a dream and blink their eyes. Then their minds started to turn slowly, and only then did they remember what they had to do. Then they started to give marks crazily. The people who were watching from the periphery also gradually regained their senses. Someone muttered, "Why do I find the third princess consort so familiar? Now that you mention it, I remember now. Didn't a fairy appear in the capital city some time ago? Isn't that the fairy, the third princess consort? I didn't even think about it. Full marks. The third princess consort must get full marks." The atmosphere at the scene was getting more and more heated. In order to prevent the crowd from surging, the soldiers hurriedly maintained order. When Yun Biluo saw this scene, the gentle smile at the corner of her mouth froze. She originally thought that Hellion Vivian would definitely lose when it came to looks, so she didn't pay much attention to the martial qi test before. But now, the person who was about to lose was actually her. deep in her heart she didn't take Hellion Vivian seriously. It was all because of Hellion Vivian's face. In the end she found out that this person had been pretending to be weak all along and had hidden a good hand of cards. The more Rebellious thought about it, the tighter she clenched her fists under her long sleeves. Her master had given her an order to successfully return to His Highness' side. If she lost today, how could she go back? Unless... Right at this moment, a sudden burst of excitement interrupted Rebellious' thoughts. Oh my god, it's really 1,000 marks. Everyone gave the Princess Consort full marks, that's great. Only a blind person can't see the beauty of the boss. Boss? Why did you call the Princess Consort boss? Chapter 426. Don't you know? In White Academy, there is already a large group of people who recognize Princess Consort as their boss. Among them there are many people from aristocratic families. At first they also thought that Princess Consort was a love-struck trash, a dandy to the extreme. But after getting to know her more, they found out that she was not like what the rumors said. Although she was usually not easy to get close to, every time she spoke she would hit the nail on the head. But she would not have malice towards people. As long as people did not talk about her, she would not find trouble with anyone and would only lie on the desk and sleep. Not only that, in the past, people always laughed at her for wanting to hug people's thighs and rely on flattering masters to get to the top. In fact, she herself was the founder of Profound Heavens. She made a good armament and just entered the academy. She achieved results that no one else had ever achieved. Under her leadership, the students of the inferior compound broke the cycle of nearly 100 years and won the first place. Also, just before the secondary consort selection, she even summoned the ancient mythological beast, Azure Dragon, in the academy. Even if she did not have this face, Boss is the most handsome in our hearts. Of course, if she had this face, then it would be even more perfect. Hearing this, people looked at each other in dismay. Other than shock, there was only shock. So the truth is like this? It has always been like this, just that Boss does not like to talk about it outside. That person had already become Hellion Vivian's loyal fan and would speak up for Hellion Vivian everywhere. Not because of anything else, but because among so many people Hellion Vivian was the first to come from a famous family, but never looked down on these small officials from remote places. Unlike those young ladies from aristocratic families, when in front of people, they bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted the fate of mankind. They could not wait to worship Buddha and pray for the world, but behind people they would bully and exclude them. But their boss would not. She would give them a few words of advice and let them take the next step further. Of course, those who misunderstood Boss would only hate her more and more. But those who were really Boss, no matter what happened, would always stand by her side. This was the so-called charm of personality. He believed that in the near future, when people mentioned Hellion Vivian, they would not use harsh words to humiliate her. Because one day, everything would be exposed under the sun and the truth would be revealed. As for where Boss would go in the end, following her would make people feel like worshipping her. Qingzhan was standing not far away. She did not know why, but she suddenly remembered what Hellion Vivian said to her. Then she looked at that beautiful and flawless face. She thought that she was beginning to see the world that Wang Fei had described to her. Freedom, equality, warmth, and amazement. This time, those ministers should be convinced of their loss. Eunuch Sun listened to the discussion below and laughed happily. Originally, the reason why retired Emperor sent Eunuch Sun here was to let him represent him to support Hellion Vivian. Who would have thought that Hellion Vivian didn't need anyone to back her up to win, and she even won to the extreme. Official Liao had just recovered from his shock. While he was shocked by the result, he coughed uncomfortably and then said, I announce the result of the appearance competition. Wang Fei is first. At the same time, the other three people in the competition, including Hellion Jiaoer, were jealous and unconvinced when they heard the result. The young lady with the surname Lan from before pretended to be puzzled and said, It's really strange. Previously, during the appearance appraisal, the result was clearly older sister Yun's first place. Why is it now? Princess Consort, I don't mean anything else. I just feel that it's probably because everyone's sense of beauty is different. Suddenly seeing older sister Yun lose, I feel somewhat puzzled. When Hellion Jiaoer heard this sentence, the dim light in her eyes brightened up again. How could she forget about the matter of appearance evaluation? However, Yun Biluo's expression became unnatural. He wanted to stop it, but it was too late. This was because Helian Weiwei had already opened her mouth. Her voice was flat with a unique elegance. Lord Liao hasn't announced everyone's serial number yet. How can Miss Lan be so sure that Miss Yun is the first? After all, the lady with the surname Lan did not think too much about it. When she was asked by Helian Weiwei, she was a little stunned. Of course, Helian Jiao Air wouldn't let this matter go so easily. This was perhaps their one and only chance to make a comeback. They must seize it. Big sister, have you forgotten? Although official Liao hasn't announced everyone's serial number, the result of the appearance evaluation has been posted on the list. Helian Jiaoer smiled gently as if everything she said was reasonable. That's why we feel that the result is a little unfair to Sister Yun. Yun Biluo's eyes were red. She smiled and shook her head. It's okay. I admit defeat. Although she said it was okay, she acted as if she was the one who suffered a loss. Helian Vivian had always admired these people because of her temper and character. She didn't learn how to act in front of others since she was young. She didn't know how to make people feel comfortable with her words. So at that time she had offended a lot of people and was stabbed many times. Later on she became indifferent and mature. She wouldn't change herself to cater to others. She would only allow herself to stand higher and wantonly win this battle. Seeing that she didn't speak for a long time, Helian Jiaoer thought that Helian Vivian didn't have enough confidence. She raised the corner of her mouth. Helian Vivian smiled and said, as far as I know, the list only announces the serial number, but not the contestant's name. Why are you so sure that Miss Yun is number 11? Upon hearing that, Miss Lan glanced at Yun Biluo. Helian Vivian saw her reaction. Her thin lips curved with slight mockery. Don't tell me that Miss Yun has admitted that she's number 11? Yun Biluo didn't say anything. She bit her thin lips tightly and played dumb. Huh? Princess Consort, although you won the first place, Sister Yun didn't do anything wrong. Why are you talking about her like that? Miss Lan was very hot-blooded when it came to helping others. It was just that she couldn't tell right from wrong. This made Helian Vivian very annoyed. If a person did something wrong, there was always a reason to forgive her. Because in life, who didn't make mistakes? Letting others off the hook was equivalent to letting oneself off the hook. However, if a person did something wrong and thought that she wasn't wrong, then Helian Vivian didn't need to talk to her. She should just kill her. Lord Liao, announce everyone's serial number. Chapter 427. When Yun Biluo heard Helian Vivian's words, she did not know why, but she felt a little uneasy in her heart. The official with the surname Liao also wanted to announce the results as soon as possible. However, he did not know what each person's corresponding serial number was. The answer was with the steward who was in charge of recording. This was because when these beauties entered the venue today, they would show their serial numbers before reporting their names. Therefore he was not sure who was who. He only glanced at the steward. The steward reacted quickly. He shook the rice paper in his hand and read aloud, the first place of the appearance evaluation, serial number 11, name, Helian Vivian. What? How could this be? Miss Lan looked at Yun Biluo subconsciously. Sister Yun, this. Yun Biluo suppressed her emotions deeply. Her eyes were still red and pitiful. When you mentioned it in the beginning, I didn't take the appearance evaluation seriously, so I didn't pay much attention to it. Now that I think about it, it was indeed my negligence. As she spoke, she raised her head and looked at Helian Vivian. After all, I'm in the wrong. It's right for the princess to blame me. However, I didn't have the intention to pretend to be the first place. Sister Lan and the rest didn't think so as well. Please don't misunderstand, princess. This sentence sounded like an apology, but in reality, it was just saying that Wei Wei had misunderstood her and wronged her. Helian Vivian smiled. Her eyes were cold and her voice was calm. Miss Yun, you and I both know what the truth is. If you go overboard with your acting, be careful that you won't be able to clean up the mess. When Yun Biluo heard this, her eyes reddened and tears were about to fall. However, at this point those who were standing below the stage could also see the truth. Of course, there were also those who were confused. They thought that Yun Biluo was wronged but did not explain clearly, resulting in such a misunderstanding. However, no matter how she pretended to be innocent, it was useless. The well-deserved number one was Hellion Vivian. Hellion Jiaoer knew that if she didn't say anything now, Hellion Vivian would steal all the limelight, so she put on a fake smile and said, "Big sis, since you already know that you're number one in the facial evaluation, why didn't you reveal your face and serial number? We were all worried about you for a long time." This sentence was obviously a trap. No matter how Hellion Wei answered, it would smear a layer of black on today's victory. This was exactly what Hellion Jiaoer had in mind. However, Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a smile. "Naturally, I have my own reasons for not revealing my face and serial number. It's because I discovered something. Ever since the day the results were released, someone has been trying to stop me from coming to today's selection. They even wanted to get rid of me directly. I also caught a few people. I can bring them here and ask them who sent them to investigate me. I want to know who the mastermind behind this is. Little Seventh Prince. Third sister-in-law, I'm here." Little Seventh Prince appeared from the crowd with a fierce look on his face. He held a meat bun in one hand and a dog-beating stick in the other. He drove a few Yamen runners to the stage. Not only Hellion Jiaoer, but even Lord Liao also panicked when he saw those bailiffs. He quickly stood up and said, "How dare you? How dare you make trouble for the princess consort? Someone take these people away. Beat them hard." "Wait." Hellion Vivian stopped him. Her voice was neither fast nor slow. "Official Liao, I haven't asked them yet. Why are you in such a hurry?" For some reason at that moment, Liao Wuliang actually felt that the aura emitted from this young girl was exactly the same as the third prince that he didn't want to provoke. At this moment, Baligaju was sitting in his original position. He supported his chin with one hand and looked at this scene casually. There was a playful look in his eyes. His prey was playing again. This was good. When she was done, he would deal with those who should be dealt with. Big sister. Hellion Jiaoer also became anxious. In front of so many people, especially in front of the third prince, whom she once admired the most, if those people really sold her out, then the image that she'd painstakingly restored in the capital for so many days would also disappear. After she finished calling out eldest sister, she again softened her voice. "This kind of people, what are you keeping them for? They are a bunch of people who don't do anything. You also know that they are people who take the public grain." Hellion Vivian looked at her with her arms around her shoulders. "Since you are so smart, you should be able to see that they are wearing the same clothes as official Yao's men. Moreover, as far as I know, just yesterday you met with them. Why are you pretending that you don't know them today?" Hellion Jiaoer's eyes shook violently. "Big sister, what are you talking about? I don't understand at all." "You don't understand?" Hellion Vivian laughed. Then she stretched out her left hand and snapped her fingers. With a swoosh sound, the mercenary in black knelt in front of her. "Tell me what you saw in the past 2 days." "Yes." The mercenary was wearing a half mask and said in a low voice, "Ever since young master got the number, Hellion Jiaoer has been asking these people to search for young master's whereabouts. She even thought that young master was just a village girl. She had personally ordered them to kill the weeds and get rid of the roots when they see you." When everyone heard this, there was an uproar. Hellion Vivian looked indifferently at Hellion Jiaoer, who was standing in front of her. "I am just a little prettier than you and you want to kill the weeds and get rid of the roots. Madame Su really raised a good daughter." "You?" Hellion Jiaoer took a deep breath. She knew that this was not the time to fight head-on. Tears fell from her beautiful eyes. "Big sister, think about it carefully. What are these people's identities? You saw it yourself. They are all Yamen runners. Even if I am the second miss of the general's residence, I can't command these Yamen runners." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "You can't command them, but there is someone who can. What do you think? Lord Liao?" This official knows nothing about this matter." Liao Wuliang's forehead overflowed with sweat. "Princess Consort, you don't know. These Yamen runners only obey on the surface but disobey on the inside. Sometimes I don't even know what they do." Hellion Vivian smiled. "In other words, this matter has nothing to do with you and Hellion Jiaoer. They made the decision themselves. Lord Liao, do you think I am a fool? As for why you allow your subordinates to be ordered around by Hellion Jiaoer, I think this reason should be made known to your wife. That would be good. That you're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.